Yo, how you doing, folks? Welcome to episode 134 of the Simpa Life Podcast. Hope you are keeping well. Do not be shocked, do not be alarmed. This is a test, same as I've been doing for the past few weeks, of different intros to see kind of which one fits best with me, which one fits best with our guest. Today was kind of an inadvertent, kind of synchronistic experiment. Today's guest, as you will likely see, when we started recording, we just kind of jumped straight into it, and I didn't see a natural point to try and flow in with the intro. So today's guest got no introduction for the first time. So yeah, you're either seeing this at the intro or this isn't happening and I'm sat recording this for no reason. But yeah, welcome to the podcast. I hope you're keeping well. Hope you have had a good week. I hope you, are grateful that we made it through another January. The darkness is getting behind us. It's getting brighter. It's getting lighter. We're well on our way to spring. I know it feels like it's a long way away, but hey, we're about 6 weeks away from Spanibus. Do you know what that means? That's spring right there, baby. So yeah, a few more podcasts, a few more episodes. We've booked in some wonderful guests coming up. So yeah, do stick with the podcast. Greatly appreciate all of the interactions with all of the shorts, all of the clips that have been creating, and really appreciate all of the interactions and the love. So without further ado, let's jump into introducing today's guest, who is a Canadian stand-up comedian who is currently residing in Devon in the UK, who has appeared on numerous TV shows both in Canada and over here in the UK. They've performed around the world alongside some other amazing acts. They're a former co-host on Canadian TV, amongst many other accolades. Please welcome today's guest, Craig Campbell. I'm guessing I'm going to cut here and then I'll splice the start of the conversation, what that we recorded. Bye. Sweet. Thank you, Zoom lady. I actually really appreciate the fact that she says that. I had, of all people,
Oh no.
it was the first time I booked Tommy Chong.
Oh
And
no.
and I was just kind of like a bit like nervous and kind of starry eyed. And he was talking for about 25 minutes, and I looked up and I didn't have the recording thing in the top corner. And I said it to him, and he went, give me
Hey
a
man.
he went, give me a second. He shouted Shelby, came like got a joint, and he went.
Yeah.
Took a few off, put the joint down,
Yeah.
and just did it verbatim. Like literally, it could have been
Whoa.
I did the intro, and he just jumped straight in and went, "Oh yes," and it was almost robotic, like he was scripted. And I was
Wow.
like, "That's a man that spent his time behind, in front of a camera." You know what I mean?
And worked with Cheech Marin.
And he's used to stoners as well, so yeah, it worked out pretty well. He was so forgiving.
Totally. Hey,
Um,
turn the radio on, man.
that's a good impression.
He also even stranger. He went to at least for a year to the high school that my mom's dad taught art in. Strangely.
Small
Uh,
world.
yeah, totally. Crescent Heights in Calgary. Not
Mm.
many people know that about his Canadian connection, the Chongster. So that's
I
pretty
think he
cool.
got a dual citizenship, didn't he? I think that's just so people then always
Wow.
made the assumption. I think that's actually something we may have discussed when we recorded an episode.
Oh, cool.
Um, but yeah, he's quite proud of his Canadian roots, and I think
Love that.
it mixes up Cheech and Chong, I think, quite well, and it's emblematic the fact that they became American folk heroes, as it were, but it was
Yeah,
from sort of Mexico, the other across the borders of descent of the cultures, as it were, of the two
yeah.
individuals, and I think I just mashed up so well, and it's obviously yourself being a comedian. I think it's a bit frustrating to see post air quotes legalization, 10 years plus now. We don't
Yeah.
have that representation yet. At the height of Nixon, at the height of Reagan, at the height of the war on drugs,
Yeah.
and Singapore and other countries hanging people. Granted, Singapore is still hanging people. There's hanged like I think
Yeah.
20 people last year.
Yeah.
Um, they had that representation and they were able to go on that tour and be that kind of voice of a generation. And now that there isn't a
Hmm.
voice of that generation, there isn't a cannabis comedian, as it were. There are some comedians will joke about weed, but in a kind of a 50-year out of date stereotype. You know what I mean? It's not
Yeah.
down with the kids, so to speak.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a funny one. It's evolved, but comedy hasn't caught up with it. That's for sure. I agree.
Mm. Yeah, it
Yeah.
is weird. It is
I'm
weird.
trying. I also like that. Well, like you mentioned, just how sharp he is. How the mental acumen of him and Cheech
Mhm.
being. I don't know if you've ever seen Cheech winning the Celebrity Jeopardy. which is pretty. I mean, it's only for charity, but to watch, like, L.A., America's greatest, most famous stoner, uh, outdo what's his name, Anderson, did from CNN fame, the CIA freak, the Vanderbilt. Um, uh, oh, what the heck's the guy? And I'm talking about someone's mental acumen, and I can't. You'll be freaked out when you see him. Uh, Anderson. Oh,
Oh,
CNN.
the news anchor guy.
Yeah,
Uh,
Anderson Cooper. Anderson
Anderson
Cooper
Cooper.
in the final of
Hmm.
Jeopardy, Celebrity Jeopardy against Cheech Marin, and he gets leveled. Simpa, he gets leveled. Like Cheech is just beep, 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 like on it. Like everyone, what is Guatemala? Just like like all over it.
Hmm.
And it's quite stunning, It's like it's almost a surreal bit of TV clip. It's well worth checking out. It's ridiculous. Like
Yeah.
the most stoned man versus the most CIA created mole, and just literally hands his intellect to him. It's amazing.
Well, yeah, exactly. All these sort of reporters, these kind of institutional legacy media types, they are seen to be intellectual because of the teleprompter. They have
Yeah.
brilliant regurgitation skills. They can
Yeah.
sit there and get made up and sit under the lights, and I'll say that under the numerous lights I'm sat under, well, there is no makeup. I just look
Uh-huh.
this white.
Yeah.
Don't fucking leave this goddamn room. And yeah, they can go on and perform, but someone like say Cheech is interested in his acumen, his acting acumen. When you look at some of the roles that he's had and like the serious way that he takes his craft, and that isn't to say that Tommy doesn't. Tommy does in
Yeah.
a different other way, and Tommy's like ability for music and his natural acumen there as well is
Yeah.
phenomenal. And it's they have this for the average individual. Cheech and Chong are two just dudes smoking weed, idiots, and that's what they assumed the actors to be and whatever else. But they're not. They were advocates and champions for a culture that was highly misrepresented, over politicized, over policed, and ultimately turned into scapegoats for a bounce back of the world after World War II. When the beatniks, hold more fucking weight than Cheech and Chong do in terms of cultural issues. They rose from the culture, whereas the beatniks helped, direct it.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. Yeah, they're still sharp as tacks. Now, they're and as you mentioned, it's also still like vilified now heavily.
Hmm.
There's no better example of that than legalization in Canada. And we were talking off camera about, like, the stalwarts that we know, probably some of them mutually, of people who were, like, fighting for medicine. That's where it really became instrumental in Canada, and that's what really shifted it towards legalization. But when I say legalization, it reminds me, like, the people who were most switched on with it. And again, unfortunately, as we mentioned, I'm thinking of people who are now deceased, unfortunately, kept the dream alive with, like, Rick Simpson tears, for literally, kicking cancer into remission for like 2 decades, when they were told in November that they'd be dead by Christmas, like 15 years before that. Just madness,
Hmm.
like people fought, and they were the ones that most knew. And something that I don't think even people in Canada think about that much, but I tell people, if they, have the time to be curious and to lend an ear, is that the vast majority of us in Canada, when it went for legalization, and what was it? I think it was June 17th, 2017. By the time it started getting close to that date, any of us who were, like, really, sort of in the movement and early on, you know, campaigning for it, which I can take you through the stages of that as well that were interesting. But, like, anybody who was a tiny bit switched on, as it got closer and closer and closer, as it was near the date, and the sort of invisible bars and the legislation data was becoming more real, and the information what was coming, the juggernaut that was coming, was starting to manifest, that anybody I knew at that point who was switched on would just, like, no, no, no. there's like, no, we don't want legalization. We want decriminalization. Just like, and those voices, of course, were just being like, they're falling off the back of pickup trucks and into the woods and out of airplanes and off of the skids of helicopters. And what did that guy say? Anyway, we legalize, yeah, legalize. And it's just like, where's that old guy that, just like, and of course, that's what happened. And, I'm sure better than most, if not like every increment of Canada's legalization process, but like, the number of police essentially, involved in the investment of the legalization of the actual the growing the 35 grand that it took to get a permit, of which only, I believe, the first only allowed 10. So you could 10 permits were given to grow government weed. That in these like enormo farms, and of course they were all institutionally dedicated players. There were no like grassroots growers or any of the fringe players, essentially, who everybody continued to buy their weed from because they grew the best weed anyway. But none of that expertise was invested in or in any way taken advantage of, because of the players involved were so sullied by their previous politics, essentially. And it was just such a gross process to watch take place. Literally, it's almost as evil as you can get, including to like the point of to right now, and including to like now, where you're seeing similar situations in California where they're going broke, where they're needing like government bailouts for their operations because they were so badly positioned to serve the economy that they were purported to be an offshoot of, or like a necessity of. It's so grim. It's utterly like to think. I don't know if I even told you that just prior to the nonsense that we talked about before we were taping the most recent deceptions and BS, the criminality of the last 3-4 years. Myself and a comedian named Sean Collins went over to do a stand-up and dispensary tour, Simpa, in British Columbia. Very nice if you can get it, so we and we went, and did like 3 weeks, 2 weeks of shows in 3 weeks, and went around to like, maybe 12, 14 dispensaries along the way. Like everywhere that we had a show, basically we went into 1 or 2 of the dispensaries that they had there, and everything that we'd heard was manifest in front of us. Everything as far as like the corruption of the entire thing, the predictions of the community, as it were. What did people think were going to happen right away? As happened. I think the first dispensary, definitely in British Columbia, but it might have been even across Canada, opened in Kamloops, British Columbia, Loopstown as we called it. And everybody predicted that what was going to happen is that they were going to get a queue around the block, which happened. I think it was several hours, half a kilometer long, whatever. And what did people do? They queued up so that they could buy their first souvenir government weed. And when I say government, I can't even tell you how dystopian government weed it actually is. But they bought it. And why did they buy it? So that they could get the official container which itself is just absurd, utterly offensively absurd as far as like its invasive nature and its overproduction, and it's like an antithesis to everything that anybody who is a weed smoker to begin with would have wanted in their product to begin with. And they bought them. And then what did they do? They went to their buddies who already were making, were growing weed, and that was now their container. So they always had that. If the pigs pulled them over in future, which they didn't ever stop doing, and again, that was another big problem with making it legal. All of the fines went through the roof. All of the punishments went through the roof. All of the like legal difficulties became manifold rather than less, which was ostensibly why they said that they were legalizing to begin with, to try and take away the backlogs in the court. So all of that was like a fiction entirely. And all that people wanted was the container, just so that they could put like their old growers weed in. And that's basically what happened. So they had the queue around the block for the opening day. And then literally, like, I'm not going to say nobody showed up after that, but like pretty much only tourists would have shown up after that to see the operation. And the operation would just like, again, we went in a half dozen of them, and or a couple of dozen of them, and sorry, a dozen-ish of them. And they were just like the most official ones. Like, I'll take you through one I go into, and they've got like, you've probably seen them before. I don't even know how normal they are. I only know my own experience with it, but there'd be like 15, 20 jars with those like glass magnifying windows in them. So you're able to like pick up the cube and like look at the bud inside it to get, a bird's eye view on it. And so I went to, I'm pretty much, my experience is like mid 90s Amsterdam. So if it's not White Widow or AK, I'm kind of like, you got any, Hubba Bubba or, Maui Wowie or nothing? Like, I'm asking I'm like a grandfather in there trying to get like my old high back, And so whatever the hell they sold me based on, I just, basically chose an indica and a sativa that had like the most off the charts THC level on it, old school. Just, I want wheelchair weed, man. I want to get a paralytic, man. So I go over to the counter, and the guy brought out my products, two boxes, and honestly, I like kind of stared off in space for a little bit, maybe because we'd already, that was a week into the tour, so we'd already been to some of the other dispensaries, and I just like kind of was politely sort of, looking at my shoes or staring at the wall kind of thing, because I honestly thought that what was on the counter in front of me was for someone else. There were a couple other people milling around, and I thought, oh, they've got some like salves or something, or they've got creams, because they were in like sort of ornate, what you would have thought would be like a perfume box. And so that, the guy's like, hey, here's your gear. And I'm like, sorry. And so I pay for them. And he at the same time explained to me, he was literally like, he could have been selling like power tools in like a shop somewhere, as far as how much contact he had with the product. He took us through that. He like basically, showed us that it was just like sealed in the factory, and it, gets taken in a secure vehicle truck to him. He puts it in the secure lockup in the back, and like literally he'll never get near the product. And he quite admitted that to me. I don't even remember what his like previous business was, but it had nothing to do with weed. He's definitely not a weed smoker, had no experience with it. He just saw the profit margin in it, and was able to, clear the security checks to actually get to be a front of house shop. And so he explains that to me, that he like never goes near the product itself. He, was pretty much curious about what the heck it was. And then to get into the box, it had all of the security seals all on it. I'm sure, most people watching would have already seen these. So you get through that. So now you're into the box. And again, that's all on the outside, so that like literally the proprietor himself can't tamper with the goods. Then you get into the jar, and it's like thick, like heavy, thick plastic, like a really, really heavy, like a perfume jar, like a salve jar, but like a high-end salve jar that's got a like a child-proof, really heavy lid on it as well. Like quite a complicated thing. Like literally, you'd assume it to be half of the price of the purchase. You get into it, then it's got like a really, really thick, heavy foil seal on it as well, like security oriented, mine did. And you get into that, and then Simpa, you literally like bounced around in like the size of my hand, cupped like a marble sized nugget. Like I bought 3.5 grams of each. And it was just like, it was absurd how much packaging was around this thing. The idea that you would ever like buy another 3 grams from, and that was the minimum, I think, was 3.5 grams from the dude. So though, that was the two products on hand. And it was just like, wow, like I wouldn't have bought anything like that again, just because of how offensive the packaging was to begin with. But what was really like most telling of the entire like sort of trip was that, and I say that I was like high and spacey in the place, but that wasn't the case. We were actually like, sorry, we're trying to be a bit professional on the road there, where we were like, we wouldn't smoke older products on any one day. We'd give the new stuff its due, so that we were testing it out as we went. So I didn't want to like, just be like, like have a bake on and throw something on top of it. Well, it wasn't like our mind on it, give something fair due. So we we were quite sober up until we went to to the first dispensary of the day, kind of thing, right? So but what was wild about it is that we always had in rotation, once we tried out the new gear, we had our favorite of the trip to go back to. And by that time, we're in the north of BC. So we've already been through like Vancouver Island and, sort of the spine of the province. And we'd probably been, I would think that was probably in the neighborhood of like our 9th or 10th dispensary visit. And maybe 2 or 3 days in, like second or third product, we went to I think, and I feel bad about this because I think we should have went to more, and they're somewhat rare, and they're probably even rarer now, but we went to our first illegal dispensary, and it was on Gabriola Island. In fact, I don't even want to give away, like, just to bring profile to it being illegal. But I will say that the reason it was still open, and I find this quite interesting and telling about the entire like process of legalization itself, was that the people that I knew at that dispensary felt like they weren't already busted, and like not just busted, but like shut down, literally jailed and shut down, was because of the large number of elderly that frequented their dispensary. And not just that, but the number of elderly that had weaned themselves off of at least a large portion of their pharmaceutical intake, to then supplement with weed, which itself is just like, that's such an insight into like the fact that the police, and I say this like, the police in Canada can be quite loose around the edges. I can give you like some pretty like wild, really, for what you might think of authoritarian Canada, how much the police can turn a blind eye depending on what the community's doing. And the simple fact that the cops hadn't already busted that place, literally because they wouldn't want to deal with the outcry of the like established elderly population were they to take those steps. That's like quite telling and interesting in itself. But the fact that the bouquet of like the bag of goodies that we received from, I don't have to give you the insight into why we had like I know people, Simpa, right? Like, I know we people. And so we got like we had a gift package from that trip. And again, it was early on in the trip, but of that, of the kind of 3 main products that we had, like way more than we ever could have gotten rid of in a month of being on the road in Canada, of like heavy usage. And I'm gonna like say like chronic, like on it. And but of the three like main products, aside from like, gummy bears and all this sort of, edibles that went along with it, that you yourself know, like even trying to like to sample those kind of product over like a short period of time, like
Yeah.
you gotta, yeah, you can figure out where your feet are and where you left the key, like you can get yourself in trouble real quick. But of the like main smokable product that we had from that one dispensary, always, the entire trip and to the end, we always went back to one of the three that we were given there, a hybrid. Well, like I think an indica sativa, but regardless, what was most ridiculous and telling about that entire trip is all of the sampling that we had. And bear in mind, if we went to 12 different dispensaries, I would say by the end we had like 20 different product. Every time, first thing of the day, we would try a new one to give it fair dues and give it a test. Every time after that, we went right back to the same one. And that for me was like the real insight into it. The fact that like out of like 20 different products over a couple of weeks, 3 weeks of travel, that like one stood out miles ahead of the others. Like I would have been really disappointed if I had only access to the other ones in the other towns that we were in. And some of them were like quite, some places you would definitely be like hours from most of your customers. People would have to like come from a long way away. It wasn't like it was convenient for a lot of these places. But that said, a lot of them just didn't have really good weed. And even more fearful than that, it was the first time that I ran into, and I'd have questioned that it existed before that. Because bear in mind, like, we don't have to like horn toot here, but like, I didn't move to Amsterdam in the mid 90s because I liked dancing, like I wasn't into tulips, like I really, was committed to the convenience of that, environment. And through my entire stay there, and how many randoms, and that, you can even extrapolate it beyond that like, the UK has always been very saturated, to say the least. It's not a place that you're left wanting. And I've, I think, as I lived not far from Bristol for a good nearly 2 decades of my life. So that's just like in itself, Brits are most of the people I hung out with in Amsterdam were British, for Christ's sake,
Yeah.
like it's the first place I ever heard, skin us up, all right, skin us up. I'd never heard these expressions before, and build it. That was always one of my favorite. Build it. I never heard like build it. What the hell is, there was such a breakthrough to find people building it. But like only on that recent trip to Canada, again, 2019, had I ever run into like, and it took me like 3 times in a row to confirm it. It's so hard even to say this, but bad weed. Bad weed. Like not just not good and not enjoyable, the high, but like where, and again, you're trying to assess it. You've been on the road for like 10, 12 days. It might have been something you ate. Who knows? You're trapped. You're in different hotels almost every night, at least. There's a lot of like self-assessment that's going on. Like, Jesus, I feel not good right now. And then, same thing happens the next day or, later that night. And you don't immediately associate, because I'd never, ever in my life, all through the world I've been in, I've never associated feeling like ill, like nauseous with an actual like weed product ever before. And I find that actually, as a digression, I find it hilarious that over the last 4 years that pharmaceuticals are doing the number that they are. And like, I'm not going to say guys like us, but I'm presuming guys like us. I don't want to speak for you, but like I've done a lot of unauthorized things in a lot of crazy places. And the fact that I'm like still here telling you about it is just like that in itself is kind of wild. But the fact that like, it took like 3 different times at least with this one like product that I'm telling you about before I just realized no way. Like, and it wasn't so much nausea as like just like a blinding, like I've been sniffing paint type of headache.
Yeah.
And yeah, and I'm not like subscribed to headaches. I've never in my life suffered them. It's not something like if I get a headache, I think I'm having a stroke. I'm in like real trouble. Like it's not
Mm.
like a normal thing at all in my behavior and my experiences. And it took like literally till the third time where I just had to like, it's confirmed. Like when I smoke that, I'm in like real like pinch between the eyes, not feeling good for a long time trouble. And it took like I was like just randomly talking to friends, other experienced people, as you might imagine, and one of them just said, and I never ever dreamt this could happen, Simpa. He just said, I I'll bet it's chemicals. And I hadn't even like for a moment thought about like the potential sort of off gassing of like poison in terms of that I'd never associated it with a product. And here we are in an atmosphere of legality at an official dispensary to then be introduced to the fact that like weed can actually be really toxic and really, really not enjoyable.
Mm.
And again, the most telling thing about that entire trip was like literally, if I think I have in my head, I don't even know why, but I think from memory, by the end we had like by the time we were at the airport in Vancouver, literally, I don't know if you've ever been in this conundrum, having to give away drugs. The only thing harder than getting drugs is having to give them away. And I've had to do that both in Canada and the States. And when we had that like, monstrous bag of like all array of goodies,
Mhm.
the entire bag, there was only one and there wasn't much of it left, was worth having anything to do with. And I felt that was the saddest thing about that whole trip. I just thought like,
Mhm.
wow, we have like nearly 20 different random products and some very much recommended products that only one of these is worth even going near. And it's just like, that's the game on the field in Canada now. Just hideous, hideous.
Yeah. Yeah, man. You've quite eloquently painted a picture there of your trip away, and I think you speak of exactly what I found. I went to Canada just before, literally a couple of months before legalization kicked in 2018, and I went to a couple of not licensed dispensaries, I suppose. One of them was a
Ah,
guy who was basically
yeah.
promised a dispensary license and was in the
Oh,
process
yeah.
of basically going, okay, I'll change everything that I know works and the thousands of people I know helped, and I'll get rid of
Mhm.
my suppliers and I'll get your suppliers and I'll do everything you need to. And yeah, they crushed him. And the same thing obviously happened with Mark and Jody, the Emerys,
Yes.
who arguably were some of the most, if
Greatest.
not the loudest. I may not agree with, Mark's politics or some of the allegations levied against him. But in
I don't,
terms of
sorry to
their,
interrupt, I don't know any of that, but I know Jody, and I've always liked
mm,
that's the thread that I've followed. Sorry to interrupt.
Same. It's yeah. I really respect and appreciate Jody. And I think Jody's majority involved. I don't believe Mark's involved with cannabis culture, their main brand. There is talk actually. I saw on her Instagram not that long ago of I think them getting licensed, or at least there was initially an embargo basically put on them where they were told that they will not ever be able to trade under that brand because
Oh,
there was a period post legalization where the Toronto government were the city government were putting giant concrete blocks outside of dispensaries, and because the law said that they couldn't prosecute them in a certain way, and they were in this
right.
quasi-legal loophole for a while. And yeah, you hit the nail on the head earlier with the decrim versus sort of legal aspect of the argument here of a legal regulated industry is an inevitability. But if you do not liberate us first, I go to the analogy of like when the UK ended the criminalization of homosexuality. It's if they kind of went, all right, we're going to legalize being gay, but what that means is government gay bars. You can hold your hands if with your partner if you've got a license. You can get a license to kiss, and do you know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
it feels the
yeah.
same
Death
level
by
of,
a
like you
thousand
said,
cuts.
offensive.
Yeah.
It's wrong. It's not representative of the culture. They're coming and going, no, 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 you people with no experience that we've spent decades vilifying, criminalizing, murdering by proxy, in the harshest of language, to then go, we can do this for you. And like you say, in Canada, they put through the big LPs, and these were the big boys. That was like Afaria, fucking Tilray, fucking Aurora, and all of them kind of guys. And as you say, there were people like, I'm going to put an allegedly here just for my own legal protection. People like Bill
Prison
Blair,
guard.
former cop,
Yeah,
very harsh prohibitionist, suddenly starts changing his attitude and he's shouting that he
yeah.
wants to protect patients, and then he's getting a chair position. I mean, it's quite analogous to Jackie Smith, our former Home Secretary, who recriminalised cannabis in the UK from a C to a B. She's now got an advisor position of, is it Deherde? I can't remember. I can't remember the name of the company.
Make medical.
Deggety, something like this. It's they're in the Midlands. They've just started. They're a cannabis producer,
Yeah.
and so it's, as you said, there is this pipeline of corruption. This shit. I was trying to think of an analogy in my head before. If it's kind of like when we went from having toilets outside in the UK. So this for some of my international listeners, we used to have like coal run houses of terraces, and you have the toilets outside and these little outhouses kind of thing. And then there was a whole conversion process and everything, and all toilets sort of became inside. And it's as if we're at the point where they know something needs to happen with the plumbing and with the toilets,
Yeah.
but they've gone, right, what we're going to do is put one giant shitter bowl over here and everybody's got to come and use it. And then they're wondering why people are shitting in the houses.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? It's like they understand enough of the issue, but then when like it goes in and through the process of their neoliberal brain and the capitalist intention, they're like, well, we'll license this, we'll regulate this, you've got to pay for this. All my mates in consulting, all my mates in horticulture. And like you said, this whole thing of there's a condition called cannabis hypermesis syndrome.
Oh
And
yeah.
I disagree with its existence. It's still quite contentious. It's not in most of the Western medical literature, although it is getting pushed to try to be in more recent editions. And it's
Okay.
basically classed as cyclical vomiting or sickness caused by the consumption of cannabis. I have been a very, very long term and I suppose, yes, very heavy cannabis consumer. I have tried cannabis from the Rift Mountains in Morocco. I have been to
Yeah.
Canada, various states in
Yeah.
America, Amsterdam,
Yeah.
Spain, Ireland, Scotland, all over these little isles.
Yeah.
I have never, other than having a whitey in the British parlance
Yeah.
or turning green and being sick from too much, have I
You're
ever
still in
been
America.
sick from cannabis. But even then, I've been sick. And about 5 minutes later, I'm going, I feel funny. I
Yeah.
smoke, that'll calm me down. And I do. It gets rid of the nauseous
I need
feeling
medicine.
and you're right back into it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Of
it's
course.
this phenomena is increasing massively in the number of academic papers and stuff that you're seeing from the NCHI, or I can't remember the acronym, the health thing, the devil health place in America that's independent, air quotes independent, but obviously it's, yeah, it's American government funded. They're pushing a lot of the literature. And when you look at where they're doing the studies, it's in legal areas. And like I said, the numbers are increasing in these legal regions. And so part of it could be an ignorance of a novice grower just going into a garden center and going, that feeds a tree. I want trees. So there could be an element of that. But like you said, there isn't the discretion for the companies to tell you what they've used. What I really appreciated in the state of Oregon, I went into a dispensary there when I did a road trip
Oregon.
into 2018.
Nice.
And
Yeah.
on the labels, they tell you the fucking pH of the water. They tell you every product that went near it. If you ask the guy behind the thing, he can tell you what that is. He can probably go, oh yeah, dude, if you drive up the road, you can see the farm. Like it's not the California behind two locked doors and a guy with
Yeah.
a gun and
Totally.
bulletproof glass. It's not that. It's some
Totally.
chill guy being, you want to see it?
Yeah.
Here you go, mate. I'll have a play. Right,
We had exactly that same experience. And did you have the same? Did you pop over to Colorado?
I did. I started in Colorado.
Hey, and did you find it was the same? The level of expertise and the hands-on nature and the forthcoming nature with the product was off the charts. It was amazing.
Nerdy, I think, is the best way to describe it. Is meeting another cannabis nerd and being able to go, and they go, and you light up together, and you're like, oh, the niche thing we get, and you're talking this very esoteric language, and you go off waffling into this thing of just, you really connect with a person, and they're like, and they'll, instead of giving you the spiel of like, wait, we've got this on offer this week, but yeah, it's because we've had it in for 3 months. Tell you what though.
Yeah.
We're putting this on the menu next week. I'll do you, but do you know what I mean? But that's the kind of relation. That's the kind of people I want to buy weed from. Is the people that care to be there. They're not just working at Tesco or Asda, just slapping the things through the tills for as long as those jobs exist.
Oh, Yeah, absolutely. And did you get access through hook or by crook into like the into the to the permit room or the license room in Colorado? Did you get to like the medicinal grade?
And I saw behind the scenes at one of the dispensaries,
Yeah.
and that was more of basically the day manager or the person left on the desk, as it were. Yeah, she showed me far more than she should have. She was just kind of like, "Oh, British guy, I like this. Oh, you're a journalist from the
Awesome.
UK. We like about weed, blah, blah, blah." Had all this
You
stuff.
really got to lick the window.
Yeah, it was just they were really good at
Totally.
in Colorado.
Yeah.
And then I went to Sean Honecker's spot, Yeti Farms.
Okay.
Wicked dude. Like you guys have a lot in common. And he basically left like a tech job, went up into the mountains, like I think it's 12,000 feet up, whatever it is, like snow-capped mountains in the distance, evenly in like fucking summer. And he
Yeah.
bought this huge plot of land in Dust Bowl, and he just turned it over with these plants. And he then has now acquired like different animals, and he has animals tending as his natural like pest control. And then he got such good quality from it with what he
Yeah.
was doing that neighbors started buying the adjacent plots from him. But then they were failing, so then they were coming to him for consultation. So then he's then got them to be better brands, and it's like
Wow.
that all day long. I want to see all day long. I don't want to see some dickhead on LinkedIn. No offense, I'm on LinkedIn. A lot of us are in the space we have to. But somebody who's just like from LinkedIn with a botanical degree, and I went to university and learned this, and it's like, all right, did you learn to roll a joint? Again, no offense to anyone who can't. But I mean, did you experience the culture? Not just
Yeah.
dip your toe in it. Did you actually come to be part of it and it part of you? Because once you are touched by cannabis, I say this all the time with our guests on this, that you're kind of fucked. Once it kind of grabs you, the plant's like, you're my servant now. Not in a like zombie drone kind of way,
Yeah.
but in a, it gives something back to you in such a way that you go, fuck me, I need to serve this. I want to serve this. I proudly want to defend this little plant that gives so much to so many, you know?
As they call it, the miracle weed.
Indeed,
And
indeed.
you don't see truth in that until you realize, and not many people know, that it is the only drug. It's the only drug I know of that attacks two different symptoms at once. So you look at any pharmaceutical that might be able
Mhm.
to numb from one direction or the other. It might kill pain, it might reduce inflammation, but nothing but weed does both.
Yeah.
And it does, as beyond that also, in now they're looking at it for anesthetic, for operations, for the partitioning of the actual elements of cannabis has become even more broadened the more that they look into it. It's almost like whale or like dolphin voices, whale voices, killer whales, the
Mhm.
largest of the dolphin species, that like it's our limitation of understanding their language and their voice that's the limitation. It's not on their
Yeah.
end. It's like, and that's what
Yeah.
weed is, that, that same sort of has that depth of magnificence to it.
100%. I mean, some to make a point. I was going to make a point about AI with both of them. It's I was watching. I can't remember the two guys' name. They started the humane. Not is it humane hacking. I can't remember the fuck. They were the guys behind the Social Dilemma, and there were two dudes that used to work at like Google and Twitter and that shit. And one of the guys who's involved in that project, he's also on a project where they're basically using AI to map dolphin and whale speak. And
Oh
it's I
yeah, yeah.
think it's called like world language or something, the project that
Right.
they're on.
Yeah.
And basically what they've done is they'd found this one pod, I think actually not too far from BC.
Yeah.
And they found a section where a pod of dolphins and whales would meet up,
Yeah.
and that from mapping the sounds and the communications, the dolphins speak in one dialect, the dolphins in another, but then when they meet, they speak a third language. And they're starting to map it with AI to a point of confidence where they're saying, we think we could mirror it back to them. So if we can
Wow.
then understand like the cadence and the structure of it, obviously we can't use like things like cars or whatever as reference. They're not going to understand that kind of level of language. But if we can start to understand like how they've identified dolphins give each other names, so they're called to each other specifically
Wow.
with a defined set that isn't replicated elsewhere. But there is then other, what do you call it, like formations within the sound waves that repeat in predictable forms. And so they're saying that this speaks to this language, and the fact that they can speak to each other is next level, isn't
Wow.
it?
Well, it's so funny as you're saying that, and my mind's, of course, chasing all sorts of different links from that because it's such an exciting topic matter. I just noticed out of the corner of my eye as you swiveled Howard Marks in the corner there,
Mm,
and it reminded me of I had one of the most wonderful moments in a Glasgow hotel when I had just seen him at the Altitude Comedy Festival in Meyerhofen in Austria. So he was out
wow.
as a special guest, which was in its own way spectacular. And then for whatever reason, schedule wise, I ended up in this like quite small hotel in Glasgow. And I like, half bleary eyed in the morning, literally like the next morning and the next day, I like look up from my fruit or granola or whatever the heck, my square sausagey and Howard Marks is sitting there, and it's just like, like and I probably come across as somebody who moves well in celebrity circles, but I've always actually been somewhat like quite timid in that world, and certainly have never wanted
Mm,
to impose myself on people that I know have like great profile like he does and did. But just suddenly to be able to just say good morning to him in a really like sort of less ostentatious atmosphere when I would have wanted to say hi to him like 20 times the day before in this
mm,
festival atmosphere. It was nice. And then so soon after that he passed away. But the reason I was thinking about it when you were talking about the whales is it's something that I've only just like in the last couple of days been introduced to, and I haven't even verified it for myself, except I've seen comments that have confirmed it, that apparently if you're knowledgeable in Welsh or knowledge of the Welsh language gives some degree of insight into like hieroglyphs. And I'd never ever heard of that connection before, but I encourage your viewers to look into that themselves because it utterly stunned me. And again, I saw like other comments substantiating that it's like sort of a known thing that knowledge of the Welsh language is so esoteric that it actually relates to like sort of Babylonian script type thing, like ancient script. And I'm saying this like I'm not an expert at that. I just like I leave it with your viewers to look into
mm.
that themselves. But as soon as you were talking about like whale language, I was like, wow, yeah, there ain't no crazier like human language than Welsh. Literally like almost like Basque. I think Welsh relates to Cornish in
Mm,
but other than that, I think it's quite on its own and unique that way, much like the whale language. Yeah, it's a funny twist as well for that like the BC in my experience, like particularly in that area with connection where there's
mm.
quite again quite an offshoot, but it's the case that and when you were speaking earlier about like your age and the people we know and lives lost in attrition, and the older you get, the sort of like the 40 foot view becomes 200 feet, and you
Mm.
start to see sort of it doesn't necessarily mean you're wiser, but you have potential to be wiser
Yeah.
based on profile of your horizon. And it's something that even I feel ridiculous that it was probably 15 years ago that this sensation happened. But it's so odd for me, Simpa, that like I remember, and you might yourself, what did you say you were,
36 this
34?
year.
36, yeah. You maybe remember it, but it's a few years back, and there was and sorry, I'll try not to like smirk my way through it. There was a news story in Florida at SeaWorld where a woman, a SeaWorld employee, had been like attacked, mauled, and drowned by a killer whale.
Hmm.
And it just like normal ticker tape, even before timeline zero became so frenetic as it is now. It was like a bit of in the information tapestry. I just
Hmm.
had that like moment of like caught a little bit of the news story and then just thought, hey, I I think I know a whale named Tillamook. I just have like that little like, and I might even be getting the name wrong, but it's like close to Tillamook. It's one of those like, kind of West Coast, whether American or Canadian or like native type, languages. I just thought, what the heck? And then it just like, it made me realize like, I of course, thank goodness in the age of the internet for some degrees of good reason, I did my investigation and then just realized that, yeah, like I think it was like 91, or it might even have been before that, like even 90, or but maybe even late 80s. I just realized that like, yeah, the reason I remember that whale is because that whale quite instrumentally and massively in like my little like memory of Canadian news had essentially murdered, and I'm remembering the girl's name now, a Victoria, British Columbia SeaWorld employee named Kelty Byrne. And I'd like to keep people's names alive just to celebrate, like, even one of the relatives might know that that name isn't forgotten. This young girl who worked at SeaWorld in Victoria, British Columbia, was killed by a whale. And I literally, like, I used to say that I expected that it would have been euthanized or, like just like released into the wild again, perhaps, like, given its like, it's proved it's not really domesticated. And of course not. What ended up happening is, however twisted that little circle, that industry of like whale captivity goes, they like offshot, they closed in true sort of, a SeaWorld type of a reactionary behavior. They shut down that moved a lot of like the public's ire against like the idea of having captive whales. And like you're talking about, the budding, the realization of the level of intellect of these animals began to in the public consciousness, and the realization that they shouldn't be in a swimming pool for our like enjoyment. And but then the death happened, and again I just presumed, I'd lost track of what happened to this whale. And of course what had happened to it is, I believe it was put into the belly of like a transport aircraft. If I'm remembering correctly, it was like suspended on like a harness, like in a sling, and was like having to be kept like sprayed down nonstop, while to not like die while it's being like flown around like halfway around North America to SeaWorld in Florida, where it took on its new life to bide its time before it could kill another, woman along the way, right? And it's just like, and I think in terms of like, I used to have trouble in altitude with my ears and pressurization issues and whatnot. And I've always thought like, this isn't already like, a special whale. It's already a little bit, on edge. And then, probably the very last thing for its psychological health would be to put it at like 40,000 feet in a transport aircraft. I'm only imagining that if it was able to speak English, it would say like, "Get me some chewing gum, you fucking assholes," like just like,
Jesus,
and then
yeah.
that sort of building, like, as soon as I get a chance, I'm gonna eat one of your
Oh,
bricks. I tell you for free. It just had that feeling about it. And it was such a just such a twisted thing to have. Like,
wow.
how many mistakes do we have to make? How many times do we have to step in dog shit before we just think like, look down when you're walking? It's just incredible to me. But yeah, that was like, one of those moments where like just being a bit older made you, I don't know how many people would have ever remembered like, the first whale killing, but to have the second one and then it be the same whale was just, and that's what really indicative of what we have now in terms of like media, that most thing, people just don't connect dots, they don't sort of, and a lot of people don't have the age and experience to be able to do so. And it just makes you realize how things can so easily, including like, to dovetail it into where you're talking about like the people involved, particularly in Canada behind the cannabis industry, being heavily involved in the institutionalized, behavior towards prohibition and right and prior to it. And I have to mention, when you mentioned Jodie Emery's name, that she also is so amazing in really illustrating and revealing the hypocrisy of now. Like, she was so prescient in showing Trudeau for the tyrant that he is and always was. In
Mm.
that, and if you're not aware, and it's something that you could play for your listeners or find, it's a very, very esoteric piece of radio where she, I think maybe in a phone-in radio show, but I'll try and find it for you and link you to it, of where Trudeau was confronted prior to, and if you say it was 2018 when Canada went legal, it was just prior to it, like about 6 or 8 months before Canada went legal. And everybody knew it was a train on the tracks. There was no way it wasn't going to be legalized. Everyone could see it coming for literally, like, if it wasn't 9 months, it was a year away.
Mm.
And she was instrumental in confronting Trudeau with saying, can you please stand down your goons? Right? Like, if this is all about reducing court pressure and backlogs in the court, and particularly what it was said to do from the first time that they even did studies on it, from like the early 70s, where it was known that it was disproportionately affecting, the prosecutions were disproportionately affecting people of color. So, of all strata of color, you name it, whether it was a native kid in Canada or a mulatto kid in Canada or an Indian kid in Canada, whatever you want to say about it, they had a much higher chance of being put in prison for having a dime bag on them than I ever would have, Simpa, ever in a million years. Like, literally, like, middle class white guys, the chances of you going to like jail were off the charts. And what they did find, of course, when they did send somebody who was of a demographic that wasn't normally targeted by the police to jail for it, or prosecuted them for it, that created a criminal underclass, because it meant that they were extricated from all of the trajectory of potentials of what their friends were able to do, including going to post-secondary school and including traveling to places like heavily prohibitioned at the time states. All of these factors were playing into it. But the main one being that at that time, Trudeau was just all about being inclusive and all about being diverse and all about being, prescient and leading edge in being like this thought-provoking person. And the simple fact was, he was challenged to please stop putting disproportionately, particularly young people of color, into the court system at juvenile ages, and literally, in some ways, literally destroying lives. As you and I know, you said earlier, like murdering people, like literally putting people on a trajectory where within the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years, they're literally going to hang themselves because of the repercussions of being targeted. And again, it was made so disproportionate. Everybody knew that, like, if one person was being prosecuted, there were literally 200 that were going free, that were doing exactly the same thing. It was literally that random, and that, sort of like losing the lottery rather than in any way being treated fairly by any system. And all the way through that period and up until the day of actual legalization, Trudeau kept the dogs barking. All the way through that period. Doors were being kicked in, people being turned upside down, cops even almost having that like attitude of like, it's not legal yet, you don't flaunt it in front of us, that sort of behavior of like the bullying aspect of exactly why the vast majority of authoritarians and order following pedos in the main, and pedo protectors at least, shouldn't be anywhere near authority to begin with, let alone like in charge of particularly the future of youth. And that, I feel like that needs to be mentioned, because it's such a tiny element of, it was a window in. If anybody knew about that, and again, like, I don't know how like slight the information circle would have been of that little snippet of Jody Emery confronting that at the time prime minister, who was so high on his horse, and just saying, literally, like, being polite and pleading, just saying, please, just like, it's almost legal, just stop, just get the police to stop now. Why don't you just stop now? And he never ever did, and he had the authority to do so. And it was just like, so many people trusted him up until now. Well, there he is, he's taking away your bank accounts, he's running over elderly disabled women with horseback thugs. You didn't see it coming. Well, Jody Emery did. and she saw it coming like 6 years ago, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah, 100% way. I mean, it is. Use Jodie in quote quite often with Prohibition 2.0. She said the legalization is Prohibition 2.0, and that is a quote that I use constantly because it's an extension of all of the most pernicious and most vicious aspects of criminalization under prohibition, but it allows the prohibitionist to become the guy who profits from
Yeah.
selling the fucking cannabis. But like you said, Canada was weird. It went, yeah, legal 2018, woo, and then you're like, wait. You're criminalizing under 18s for possession. Criminalizing, as you said before, they did the same sleight of hand that most countries do, and they go, oh, we're not going to put you in a prison cell, so it's not a crime. And you're like, oh, so what happens? We're going to take your shit off you, and we're going to fine you $1,000 fucking. And you go, well,
And now you can't go to Hawaii with
how's
your
that?
family.
Yeah, and you're like, how's that any fucking different? I'm still gonna get the same affliction, as you say, of restrictions as if I'd gone to a prison cell. But to save you money, I won't go to that cell. Not only that, you'll then take my money. You'll then put me in positions that will then create more situations by which you can take money off me because you'll put a little drug marker on me. And as your mates drive past and the little cameras in their cars, go up, pull them over, let's make some money, lads. And whether it's them taking the money directly through person to person corruption, or whether it is them perpetuating a system of goal orientated incentives of arbitrary numbers to ensure that they continue to get funding, they are profiteering
Yep.
personally from perpetuating the human crime of prohibition. Because again, it all boils down to ultimately again that they've missed the point. They didn't listen to us. They went, oh, these guys want to legally buy weed, let's just
Yeah.
legally sell them weed and they'll shut the fuck up. And it's like, no, you dickheads.
Yeah.
You have, so some of us, like literally I have, since what I was about 15 when I really took up cannabis. And I tried it a little bit before, but once I really kind of went, now this is my thing,
Yeah.
the cops became an enemy. I mean, they were already kind of an enemy. I had quite a rough youth, but
Yeah.
they then literally became that blue siren, that sound, that
Our
uniform.
gang. That gang.
Exactly the largest organized gang, and they were coming around targeting me. The war on drugs means that they have declared a war against me. I've grown to be a pacifist against my own nature because I had, again, like I said, a very tough, violent youth. And I've learned that I don't want to cause harm to others. I would rather be viciously offended by you than ever seek to censor you. Because if I allow them to censor you today, they'll censor me tomorrow. We've just completely lost all this sense. And I truly believed, and again, maybe still naively, that if we truly end the war on drugs, everything else, these fascist systems, these double
Mm.
thinks, this cognitive dissonance that they've created, these inculcations and manipulations and hypnotization into believing their narratives starts to fall. But they realize that too, and they're going, "All right, Christ, keep criminalizing the ones we don't like."
Yeah.
So, yeah, you can identify them by color. It's more class is becoming a thing. It's interesting, especially the British government. A lot of the Gammonites, the racist Brexit Britain for Britain types. Their minds must be fucked. They had a chancellor not that long ago called Kwasi Kwarteng.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? They've got a prime minister, Rishi Sunak. I'm not making a racist comment against them. I'm just saying of their heritage for these guys that are, oh, like white Britain for British. Like they'll transcend that racist element because of
Yeah.
their class. They have so much money that they're better. They're one of the good ones.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
that's what's happening around the world is they're still telling us that we are identifying through identity politics and to keep arguing amongst ourselves for the arbitrary differences,
Yeah.
while they separate the world by going, well, how much money have they got? What, as we were talking about before we start recording, what are they willing to do to secure that money?
Yeah.
And then once we've got them in that Epsteinian kind of way,
Yeah.
the
Yeah. Yeah.
system keeps spinning. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and including when we were speaking before the the um the the acceptance of tyranny being tied in directly to something I was thinking of when you were saying that, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but if you're not, you and your viewers definitely should be. There was something done in the early 70s across Canada called the Ledane Commission. And yeah, okay, so you're
Still,
familiar
still,
with
still
that.
explain it. I am because I've written about it a few years ago, but for
Yes,
for others.
phenomenal. but what for me, like kind of snippets of that are so like prescient for what you're speaking of earlier there is the realization, like over the last 4 years when people accepted that their inalienable rights were taken from them, the fact that they don't have free choice anymore, that any person, government, organization is legally allowed to coerce them when they're not, the
Mhm.
acceptance of that relationship. And it ties in directly with like something again that the Ledane Commission figured out in the early 70s in Canada, when they went coast to coast with like a cross section of investigators and interviewed every level of drug user and gave them, immunity from prosecution and just let them be candid about why they were taking drugs. One of the huge takeaways from that entire project was the realization that in free societies, you don't need a reason for why you like to roll up a joint and sit on the couch and play Nintendo, or why you like to go for a walk in the woods or throw rocks in the sea while you're baked out of your skull. People have this, like, they're born into this imprisoned mindset that you're
Mhm.
talking about, where they're already in a place where they don't think they're allowed to do things. And when the government steps in and says, oh, yeah, you're not allowed to do things between these goalposts and at this time of day and this time of year, that they think that they're stuck in that construct, when the simple fact is that in free and fair societies, you don't need to explain to oh, do you have like pain? Are you in pain? Is that why you no, it's because it's Tuesday and I've got nothing better to do. That's okay. That whole, like, where you going type thing, like the police ask you, hey,
Mhm.
where are you going? What are you up to? It's like, it involves your mom and her rectum. Like, that's where I'm going. Like, there's no, like, I don't need
Yeah.
to define my behaviors to justify what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. And that's part of, like, to actually have a Canadian like judge come to that conclusion that that's actually the case. That if we profess at all, if we talk about our societies being at all free or at all fair, that's actually part of the justification process that's necessary. No justification at all. And that again is like when we were speaking prior to, to taping, that as soon as, like, the people closest to me and myself for sure, as soon as in the last 4 years they said that you had to do this, you have to do this, or you can't go to the restaurant, or you can't go to the ball game, or you can't go to the theater, or whatever your thing is, as soon as they said you have to, that, like, the simple fact that that didn't just like create riots in the streets, that actual like act of arrogance, that people didn't have inside them the sense of innate freedom enough to have like both of their ears and all of the hairs on their neck just go,
Mhm.
like just to have them not at that moment just realize, no matter what happens, whether I miss
Mhm.
every film that's ever been put out or I don't get to go to a restaurant ever again in my life, I am going to die in the shoes I'm wearing right now, rather than take anything from these utter maniacal criminals. And the fact that that wasn't like part of the human like psyche, part of the collective consciousness, was just an indication of like, oh my goodness, like, and I'm sure it's the same in your circles as well, Simpa. You just realize, oh my goodness, we're surrounded by brainwashed robots. These people are
Mhm.
dangerous. Like, these are terrifying individuals that don't even care about their own freedom enough to not give it away because they want to go to Calais on a Tuesday in the summer. It's just like, and we're seeing it again. The next thing that's on the horizon, that, and I don't even know what the date is, but it's coming like a train upon the tracks, is when they're looking at, I believe, and I'm assuming yourself as well, we're not going to be able to go to like mainland, at least Europe. I don't know if Ireland's going to let us in the very near future without like bio passports and
Mhm.
and fingerprints. I'm pretty sure. And as soon as I like read about that or heard about that, the first thing I thought, Simpa, and it's absolutely the case, that just like the vast majority of people on the, on the playing field in front of us, on the, the sort of the extras of our lives, nine out of 10 people we know and shop with every day, no matter where we shop, we know are going to just take that like it's the tastiest dick they've ever tasted in their lives, and get it as deep as they can, and not for a moment worry about any of the ramifications of that, or where it's further putting them into a cattle chute, and what the future for their children is going to be as far as freedom to move. And
Yeah.
I hope I'm reading people wrong. I hope I'm reading all of society wrong, but I get the feeling that people are just going to like, oh, then you're not going to come on the stag do with us to Amsterdam, then, buddy. Like, if you don't get that passport.
Yeah, it's it's fucked up. I mean, thinking of quite a few things there, but
I'll bet.
I think prior to social media, I think if in the late 90s the same event were to occur, people wouldn't have complied. I think the selective nature of the algorithms, I think the manipulation of social media, the illusion of individual. Do you know what I mean? Me and you sit down together, we put our Facebook feeds next to each other, entirely, or like Instagram, like the explore bit of Instagram, entirely different. Do you know what I mean? The
Mm.
worlds that we see and even the lenses through which we see them, they are so micromanaged in a way that they turned up dials across all spectrums. Every radio host became a point of regurgitation for this without
Right.
aligning myself with inadvertently with Andrew Tate, but to use like Agent Smith as an example of the agents in the Matrix, individuals that are going through life that in an instant can just become this representation of the authority and capture you in this. My fear in the early days of the pandemic in the UK was not the virus, it was the people. When I
Yeah.
watched how terrified they became, and like the first time we tried to go to a supermarket and they were handing out gloves and saying you couldn't touch the trolleys unless you put the gloves on, and it was just I couldn't understand it, and I'm like, no, but you're wrong. It doesn't matter what you say. I'm allowed the thing that I hit.
Yeah.
The law is the what is the law.
Yeah.
Like a lot of people, I mean, I study a lot of history. History was one of the only subjects I was fascinated in at school
Yeah.
because it was the only
Yeah.
thing that gave me any evidence towards what the fuck was happening around me. Because
Yeah.
every other lesson was just lies. And then when I
Yeah.
called out the fucking teachers, I'd get in trouble.
Yeah.
And then I'd be like, no, but I can show you, like, here, this thing. You're wrong. And then it's like, well, you're
Yeah.
the dick and I'm the dickhead. Like it's
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
that was just turned up to 11 to borrow the fucking the phrase
Yeah.
from this is Spinal Tap. Fucking
Yeah.
amazing. Just fucking documentary.
Totally.
But that's what happened. They turned all the dials up. And as we were talking about earlier about this, the illusion of people who are waiting to get back to normal, I'm air quoting there for my just audio listeners. Um,
Thanks. Thanks for
it's
the reminder again. I still laugh out loud when I hear that.
it's it's mental when the that's what's just happening. And as you said, that is the pervasive narrative. I have a mate of mine.
Yeah.
I'm going to not give too many details.
Okay.
He's a university professor. I'm not going to tell you what university.
No doxing. No doxing.
No doxing. But he's a German national. He's a UK immigrant over here with his kids and his wife. You know, very happy. He likes the UK. Um, Decade or so older than me. You know, grew up in the stronger side of the German education system when they were still really taught the real kind of history. Which is something I've always had an affinity and appreciation of the conversations that we can have and the frankness of it. And yeah, we were talking just the other week. I think it was last no, it'll be last year actually. So it was last month. Yeah, it was just after Christmas, just for New Year, I think. And we were start having a conversation about kind of what is happening here with this. And he said it was kind of like a phenomenon that happened in Germany, of the weight of the wave of the masses becomes so great that in order to stand against it, even to stop, you're crushed by it, let alone turn around and stand against it before you even can think. Once it builds up to such like a critical mass, it crashes on the shores of people's consciousness, and it takes a brave fucking individual. And in the early, like I said, in the early days, I watched, social media censorship go through the fucking roof. Like, I mean, I'm a cannabis and drug advocate, so I'm used to being having fights with Meta and all these other platforms, and but watching what was kind of happening, how quick it was happening, like I said, all these other mouthpieces, these institutional individuals, these representatives of the institution, suddenly just in one voice, speaking in unison, in tongues almost. And
Yeah.
like I said, that is what sort of terrified me and turned me off from society. And it was maybe into once they said second lockdown, my brain was like, all right, I need to start really taking care of the body. That's back to yoga, meditation, eating fucking well, getting fresh air, camping, like sleeping under the stars, spending time barefoot in the woods around trees, like doing all of the human elements that they can't yet govern and keep me from. Fuck me, if I live long enough, they may try.
Yeah.
But these little freedoms, like you said, these expressions of oneself, and as you said, the Ledain Commission, yeah, the recommendations were for decriminalization and for basically a fuck you attitude. If it doesn't matter, are they adults? Yes, full stop. Oh yeah, but no, full stop. If they come to you with a problem, then your obligation as government is to help them. In the same way, I can smoke 60 cigarettes a day, eat fucking all the pizzas and fucking donuts I want, and then turn up at the fucking A&E with a heart condition and liver problems and whatever, and they can't go lifestyle choices and they don't come with cancer warnings and labels and all of the packaging of like informed consent. They should have, if any of these states or regions around the world wanted to end this, you go back, not forward. You go, okay, where was the go back to your paperwork? Here's the law that was written. What does it say? Jesus Christ, sorry, get rid of that. Job done. You don't add another fucking law on top of it. That's where I think we've got so fucked up with all of this. And I think the reasoning is once you tear up yours domestically, you have to go look internationally. And then there's 3 international treaties, 88, 71, 61 conventions through the UN. And then when you go back through them, you then end up in the League of Nations and the opioid conventions. And you start to understand that drugs were started to be settled by international bodies or the corporate states, the financial arms of nation states started to build a framework for ultimately this very thing. And with my little tinfoil hat on, that's one of the rabbit holes I've been delving down for the past several months. Is this seems to be a game plan that it was always designed that then governments could trade or whatever. I mean, you've got Iran Contra and the deals that was caught out there with Gary Webb and the wonderful report in there. I mean, Sean Penn did the movie about the CIA trading cocaine for arms to help the Nicaraguan rebels with fucking gold from Iran and also a very intricate
Oh,
thing.
yeah.
And that's where the real Rick Ross comes from.
Yeah.
He was a crack dealer in LA and was selling some days million plus crack a day for the CIA, and that was all funding these slush funds. And
Yeah.
this, like I said, there seems to be these threads, and then when you go further back
That
with
was
the
that was revealed by Michael Rappaport, if you're aware, the L.A. police detective who killed
he
himself in Oregon.
it was Gary Webb was the guy who was revealed the Iran Contra, wasn't the LA the guy who did had the tape for GFK. So the
I'm
guy I'm thinking of.
not familiar with that. No, this is Michael Rappaport is just a LA police detective that realized that all of the cocaine and crack he was dealing with was being brought in by the military into the ghettos, obviously, like that, basically the Bloods on the Crips,
Mm.
and he somewhat died in obscurity, unfortunately. He went into, I think his book was End of Oil, which is a tiny bit misguided now, but he died in a friend's uh, travel trailer in Oregon, unfortunately. But yeah, he was one of the, like, I consider him like an early actual whistleblower as well. But yeah, I'm familiar with that era and the revelations of it, and they're basically creating black money for black ops.
And I think now what they're doing is making, grey money, white money for other ops. Like it's just for purely profit. Is now they get to control both sides of it because, as we say, legalization everywhere is still predicated on the legal restriction of individuals because cannabis isn't illegal anywhere in the world. It
Yeah.
can't be. It holds no
Growing wild
culpability.
in the bush.
It holds no culpability. It's not doesn't have you can't put a cannabis plant in a courtroom and a judge
Yeah.
go, well, you're going to fucking prison. Like it doesn't work that way. So there
The
are
weed.
unlawful cannabis related offenses. And so
Yeah.
when again it's that language of manipulation of rhetoric, they just basically standardized the playbook decades ago and
Mm.
repeated it in that is it Goebbels? Was it Gorbachev? No, it was
Yeah.
Goebbels of make a
Yeah.
lie repeated big enough and make a lie large enough, repeated often enough, and it becomes the truth. I think it might be misattributed to him, but I think it was one of
Yeah,
the Nazis
maybe.
anyway.
Yeah.
But that's basically what kind of happened with drugs is they just kept this line and just regurgitated it, and that's what's happened with whether it be the previous event over the past sort of several few years, or look at the fucking financial crash and everything
Yeah.
that sort of happened there. It was a bunch of coked up fucking narcissistic bankers, just crazy gambling addicts, just speculating off on the fucking futures, driving everything into the fucking ground for more Bentleys.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And then they went, oh no, no,
And
it's the poor people. They can't pay the mortgages. These dickheads.
I think also part of what you're talking about as well, and obviously it's part of what you're talking about because everything, as you know, is just asymmetric. So they're getting you from every angle and they're bespoking it depending on the society and the culture and the strata of person in the culture and the society. But the idea that like they've drilled into people's heads, also the ideology, like we're speaking of earlier, the necessity of justification. So that whole idea that you need to like have a reason why you've got a weed in your pocket goes along and is hand in hand with the same like, oh, why aren't you wearing a mask? The idea that some knobend at ASDA or like anyone anywhere can be like beyond you just not wearing a mask, have to like even that they have in their heads that they've had drilled into them that they become so robotic that they have the temerity to even believe in a deluded dream that you have to tell them why you're not
Mhm.
doing something. You got, whatever they are, security guard of whatever level, even the cops, it's just like, I'm not telling you nothing. I'm not wearing it. That's why. That's why we're not buddies. I'm not like giving you a lesson in why I do or don't do what I do. There's no reason that I only had two major confrontations through that entire thing. And I've had real like trouble sometimes. That's been a real like thing for me, and I'm sure you've gone through the same sort of wrestling match where you're trying to be understanding of everyone's position, but at the same time like we're quite strident in our own positions. And the only like tiny insight that I got from one guy back channeled me, a guy from Wales, just told me that the reason he wears a mask, and I'd never considered this before, Simpa, again, it just comes from a position you don't think about, is he just said, because he's so fed up with these people, he's so frustrated with this entire situation and everything we're talking about, but in real time, because it was as it was happening when it was going on, he just said, the reason I wear a mask is because if I ran into somebody who wanted me to wear a mask, I might kill them with whatever I could reach at that time,
Mhm.
and I can't like do that. I've got kids and I can't like deal with, and now I see it as a cop out because I did it.
Yeah.
I did it. I didn't through the entire thing. And I was going to say I only ran into two incidences where I was told that I had to and that I had to justify why. And
Mhm.
both of them ended in tears. Both of them, the person who was like accosting me. And I went to the same thing right away. I kind of like already played it out in my head, but the first thing I did was just like, stop bothering me now. And I wasn't threatening in any way. I just said,
Mhm.
stop bothering me right now, or I'm going to begin filming this interaction and I will use it as a court judgment against you.
Mhm.
That's it. We're not talking anymore. Both times the person involved sent for someone else in the organization to not be crying in my presence, and then they basically just like capitulated because of course they had no authority then. And by that time, as I'm sure you were aware, that was already infringing on the Mental Health Act,
Mhm.
right? Like you can't berate or quiz or continue to bother someone who's told you that they don't wish to discourse with you anymore for any reasons that you dream up. And just that whole idea of like, that Jobsworth type behavior, that trumped up, security guard type mentality of like whatever was dwelling in the dark hearts of these people that they just needed like the consensus of psychopaths to suddenly think that they were, going to, it was almost like the post 911 when stewards and stewardesses suddenly became like security guards on flights, rather, just get me some
Mhm.
fucking peanuts and a gin and tonic. I don't need you to like assess my fucking, my danger as to whether or not I'm going to try and eat the wing, you weirdo. Like, get away from me. Just that whole, like, they empowered a bunch of dummies. They empowered a whole, and, that was what we all saw,
Yeah.
unfortunately, that just widespread dumminess.
100%. It's like, ironically, that was the infection in a way. And it's ironic that that guy,
Yes.
his health was improved or his life was kind of improved by wearing a mask in that instance, purely to save himself from beratement of wearing a mask. It's such a weird thing because I mean, with my like mental health
Slavery.
history and like health history and everything, like I immediately was like, I already know my rights and laws from what I've done with drug research and everything else. I'm pretty good with this shit. So I immediately delved into it and went, if I said this sentence,
Reconfirmed
I,
what you already knew.
I could sue you. If I said this sentence, then you could get fired. Like if I said, and you just basically pocketed a load of
Yeah,
different things for interactions, and then it was
yeah,
more. I didn't capitulate and like give in to wearing a mask, but I would then not do things for comfort of my girlfriend or family, and be like, I'm not going to go to that event because you're
yeah.
going to expect me to do this thing. I'm not going to do that. And it took me decades to get my family used to the idea. If I'm turning up, first I'm going to smell a weed. Secondly, I'm going to smoke a joint outside at some point, whether that be your
Yeah,
house, a pub, whatever.
totally.
That's my cigarette. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
I'm just,
yeah.
and so once they kind of got used to that idea, it was then, yeah, it was just a pleasant sort of thing. Same now with I'm a prescription patient. So I was in a pub not too long ago with my mother eating some dinner and catching up, and I kind of put my pot on the table, and I went, I could be a dick right now and get them to allow me, or as it were, to no, rather them to not bother us because I can make it allowed for me to basically vape at this table.
Or-
But out of respect for you for not wanting to feel uncomfortable, I'm gonna go outside and have a smoke. Do you know what I mean? And it's I think a lot of people will have done that kind of thing, and I think
yeah,
a lot of people will initially remember we were told, what was it, 3 weeks? 3 weeks to curb the trend. 3 weeks
yeah.
and it'll be over. 3 fucking weeks, they said. And most people, I think, are psychologically still there. It's just the longest 3 weeks ever. At some point, they're going to come out, and I can't
Yeah.
help but feel to tie it back to kind of what we are saying about my German friend and the conversations we were
Oh
having,
yeah, yeah.
of what I brought up to him of like, didn't you guys have in your recent history a guy who was given temporary immense powers because of an emergency that he
Yeah.
promised to give back immediately and things would go back to normal, and shit never went back to normal? Like that's, I don't want to make the comparison of the Tories to the Nazis, but
Yeah. But it's
well,
direct,
actually maybe I fucking do. There's enough
direct,
evidence of this. Like,
direct.
the whole shit austerity, there was
Oh,
recently at least 500,000 are directly attributable to policies just under austerity from 2012 post. You can go from 10.
Johnson's killed 500,000 on his own.
Yeah, then you've got
That's
exactly the COVID responses and everything
Blair
else.
is
And
still kicking
it's,
around, not to bring labor into it, but they're all, we all know they're all the same at the top,
well,
unfortunately.
it just exactly the fact that David Cameron was like, oh, we're going to bring back Foreign Secretary Cameron, and they're like, oh, but he's not an MP, and they're like, oh, well, just he's a lord now.
That's
So it's the way they can expedite
that
results. Look at the post office scandal, for fuck's sake. I'm writing an article on it at the minute and doing a comparison to prohibition because it's
terrible.
the same coercion. The post office had no authority, no evidence by which they could lawfully try them in a court of law and get them found guilty under the auspice and under the protection of the laws of an equal trial, right? The same
Yeah.
is true for drugs. It's all coercive. The foundational evidence they have to justify a law under their own thing of it is a piece of fucking paper that says that it's illegal.
Wow.
So they were in violation of their own international treaties, whether it be
Wow.
the European human rights or fucking international human rights. Multiple treaties were a party to with the UN. Um, it's supposed to uphold these very things, but with this one thing, they go, well, this piece of paper supersedes, and it doesn't. That piece of paper doesn't do shit because it basically requires within its own language that it be evidenced, proportional, and a rational response to what is. And there is in no way anybody can say the British drug laws, if not most of European drug laws, are evidence based. Do you know what I mean? They
Yeah.
roll with the whims of these same individuals. It's a mental,
Protection.
yeah, effectively, and that's what's now happening with the prescriptions. They are exactly the pots you
I said,
prescribed before, and it is now people do allegedly. I may or may not do exactly the same of putting a product into that pot. But what that
yeah,
pot gives me is currently for the 3.5 year waiting list that I'm sat on with the NHS means that they can't kick me off as a drug user. As long as I pay the private clinic, the actual
yeah.
doctors that can't afford shit because they're being divested by the Tories to put the money into their pockets, I've got to keep paying them to get that service. It's an
And
absurdity. It's a,
does that tie in any way with Theresa May's husband being
entirely with the whole thing now. Victoria Atkins, who at the time when Theresa May was prime minister, her husband was the I'm trying to remember his title. He was the head of asset management, I think, for a private equity company. It wasn't Privateer, it was the other one, which I can't think of off the top of my head. And they basically were at the time the
Cannabis
largest
is us.
investor in GW Pharmaceuticals.
Yeah.
So they
Yeah.
had the largest voice in the room other than the founders and whatever else. And there is some evidence to show that these were connected beyond that boardroom anyway. And yes, at the time she was prime minister, she made Victoria Atkins her drug minister. Victoria Atkins' husband was a guy whose name escapes me right now, but he was the managing director of British Sugar, who had a contract with GW to grow 40 acres of cannabis in a specially adapted greenhouse that they'd built connected to their sugar beet, because basically the process of creating sugar creates a lot of CO2. So they basically got in some economists and went, we've got all this waste CO2, what can we do with it? Some eggheads went, you could grow tomatoes. These dickheads tried to grow tomatoes and fucking failed
Yeah.
terribly. And so then they got somebody else and went, tomatoes? Sorry, oops.
They called the
Trigger
Dutch
me pen.
buddy.
Yeah, they got and they went, what can we do here? And they went, oh well, GW, you're looking for, subsidiary growers, and you guys are connected with the government. Your wife's a minister. And so she's now just got the job of health minister here in the UK. So this further
Nothing wrong.
divestment of the NHS, because it's not just cannabis. Like cannabis is phase one, and there are about 30,000 private patients a year. They want to try and get to Germany level, which is about 100,000 a year. Then they can
Yeah.
really start to break that ceiling and make some money for themselves. I mean, they're already making money, but they want to make some like bank. But the next line from that is private ketamine infusion, £6,000 a pop. You get 3 infusions over a weekend or over a couple of days. You go into a doctor in a clinic setting and you get a drip and an IV for ketamine. And you go and you get to then say, oh, and you get to suddenly speak of ketamine. I can announce now, I've got Dennis Walker coming on the podcast, guys. Micro, I can never pronounce his fucking name.
Uh-huh.
Mycopreneur. Micropreneur. It's like Myco, like Mike as in mushrooms, and entrepreneur. And he does online skits and stuff like that, taking the piss out of like the woke gentrified, these new age hippies. I take an ayahuasca 5 times. My shaman said that I have the brightest of all of the chakras. Those kind of fucking bastards. Like they're doing and going and paying for those ketamine infusions and whatever else on mummy and daddy's money, and they're like, I'm enlightened, and they're walking around in robes like when the Beatles came back from fucking India in the 70s, late 60s. I wasn't around obviously to get the dates right, but you know what I mean? It's so artificial. You are not representative of these cultures. You are commercializing them, commodifying them to profiteer from them while denying them their voice. So you're not hearing from the tribes of Peru, from these native practitioners that learned from their daddy, who learned from their daddy, who learned from their daddy, who learned from their daddy, infinitum. They're literally got, like I said, these international tourists, these fucking online influencers that can then put in their bio, oh yes, ketamine experience, ayahuasca, DMT, and all of this shit, and have this faux image. Yet 90% of the people that I know still now, if you'd wear even a shirt like this with a
Yeah.
leaf on, cops gonna see you and go, oh, let's have a search of his pockets. We're still
Yeah.
getting targeted because of the way we smell, the way we look. Yet these
Because
fuckers can cosplay it and dress it and get in there like, yes, I did this in Peru in illegal territory. Actually, the mushrooms that we took were in Amsterdam, and actually we were allowed to do it. It's just so gentrified, so classist, and so pompous. As you can tell, it riles me because I live in quite a deprived part of Durham. You've seen us. As I've seen you 4 times, I think, perform in Durham. The difference in the students in the city, and as soon as you step outside of that southern money bubble and that
yeah,
pompous education,
jungle.
yeah, then you see what the real people are, and our voices aren't getting heard. That's what I've done in this space for nearly a decade now, is try and remind the money men when they're going, we'll make millions when we fucking get our IPO, or the stocks on this, the futures, well, get in now, lads. And they're all just speculating on a future that's never going to happen, because that's not representative of the culture and the reality. We're still going to be here holding our placards, marching our marches, meeting in private, still being vilified and criminalized, trying to build a new consensus. And I at least take comfort in countries like Canada and states like Washington and Colorado that are now like 10 years down this road, that there are people there that I've spoken to, some I've had on the podcast, that are like, nah, this isn't it, man. Legalization isn't it. Stop. Don't let them take over and capture markets. Figure out how to actually liberate the people to cease the war on drugs is firstly, yes, an end of criminalization, but then it has to involve some form of justice. Even if it's just a state apology, that expungement of our records and just some official, even if it's a, we're sorry for what we did to the cannabis people, like something that just we can draw a fucking line and go from no, this date I am free, because all of my adult life, even a few years prior to it, I have been that criminal. Everywhere I go, I carry weed because I know that consuming cannabis helps me. Now, the doctors recognize it after decades of calling me a druggie and an addict and a criminal. But there's still places I can go where even if I've got that pot, that cop could still try and ruin my life. I'll ruin his life in a courtroom later on, but he believes he still has that authority. And it's still, to me, it's like as if, to go back to my earlier analogy, that the cop can go, oh, two men holding hands, running over, like, show us your papers, where's your license, lads? How, and then where, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
they should assume there shouldn't be a means by which they can assume anything. If it then can be medicine, they should smell it and shut the fuck up. Do you know what I mean? You shouldn't interact with it. Their assumption should be, I assumed that was a patient. You shouldn't go over and harass that person, because you wouldn't go over to somebody that was maybe a bit uneasy on their feet. And you're like, rah, rah, and it turns out they're on Oromorph or something like that. They're on a high opioid that alters kind of the way they're walking, and maybe they've got a condition. You're
Yeah.
not allowed to do that under the Disability Discrimination Act. Yet with cannabis, the number of venues I've been kicked out of, either seeing comedians or musicians. Beans on Toast, bless. I've been kicked out of 3 of his fucking shows, 2 of them in Portsmouth. I don't know what it is with the fucking security down in, I can't remember what the venue's called, but
Wow.
yeah, it's just one of those things. You run that kind of gauntlet, and as I said to you before
Wedgwood, is
about
it? Is it Wedgwoods?
Wedgwood,
Was it?
yeah, Wedgwood Rooms,
Yeah.
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 And the second
Yeah.
time I went out and I walked round the corner and like around the next corner, and I'd left my weed,
Made the
pre-roll
effort.
joints like hidden. So I went back in, like didn't have that. But then when I went back in, it was when I was still smoking tobacco, and he went through my backy, and there was like a bud in my backy. And he was like, because he literally grabbed my hoodie, and as I went kind of confidently went back through, and he pulled my hoodie, and I'm just like, excuse me, like the disrespect of it. And obviously because I smelt of weed, and he was like, I'm gonna find weed here. I don't have to
Wow.
show you any respect.
Wow.
And that's the prejudice, and and I say this as a well articulate, very well versed in terms of the law,
Yeah. Legally.
white
Yeah.
well speaking
Yeah.
fucking Brit. Do you know what I mean? And then I look at some of the brethren and sisters that I've got from different backgrounds and communities, and they
Yeah.
haven't got a fucking chance in this space, because even if they spoke far better than me and they knew it even infinitely more, they hold no cachet or credibility. They can't talk their way out of it in the eyes of these prejudicial individuals.
Yeah.
They are there to ruin your life. It's incidental that cannabis is the thing they're going to do it for.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, authoritarianism is just a contagion, that type of behavior.
Yeah.
And when they're given the justification to do so, it's just again the last people that you need empowered. And that's why, to dovetail it into the last 3-4 years, that's why I've got such a problem with the people who went along with it, particularly acts. They're the people I most relate to. And I don't care if you're a poet, a comedian, a musician, or in a band. If you agreed to do shows where the public was put through that cheese grater of necessity of showing either vax passports or showing proof of negative testing, or having to wear masks, or any of the diktats, any of the psychopathic diktats that were given, if you were on those bills and you agreed to do that and go along with that and you were just fine with it, and people, yourself, they got all kinds of, we just want to get back to playing, man. I just want to be able to tell a joke again. If you allow yourself to be a tool of these otter tools, of these mega tools, these serpents within our societies, if they're even part human, you're part of that, and I don't differentiate, Simpa. I'm not like, you didn't help fascism. If you help fascism, you are a fascist now. Welcome aboard. There's no, like, you're not like a fascist helper. It's not an accomplice of fascism. If
Mm.
you agree to have your audience have inflicted upon them diktats that would literally torture your children into perpetuity and other people's innocent children into perpetuity, you yourself are a fascist now. The only way that you can win against these ghouls is to not take part in their tyranny.
Mm.
And people who turn over to that tyranny, I just can't, like, this is, we spoke of it earlier, you know, whether it's Schwarzenegger, whether it's Springsteen, whether it's the Foo Fighters, I'm not ever, I'm out. Like, I not in the next concert, not the concert after, like maybe after, and you and I know that you just don't see it at all. Maybe after a public apology, maybe after an entire capitulation of like, I have been wrong. I have been vilifying the very wrong people in this society. Maybe after that type of contrition and that type of public, you know, appeal, would I consider ever supporting these types of careers before. But like you mentioned, it just seems like people's memories are just gone. They're just gone. They just like, you know, oh yeah, I'll buy that T-shirt. I'll get that poster. They just are not in any way understanding of what it means to be helping people who were basically the bludgeons of this and it's not like I talk about it like it's in a past tense, but it's not. It's
Yeah.
here going on. You say
Yeah.
you don't
Outside
have to
that
walk
window.
in. Yeah, totally. You talk about like a new minister of the NHS when you said that, when you talk like that there's any lineage between Theresa May and that, you know, family of mentioned David Cameron to that cabal is still, who do you think's in charge? It's still them. It's still, you know, you go to any hospital, they'll still have a poster up that pregnant women are supposed to get jabbed. They're still sending texts all the time to encourage people to take, you know, whatever you want to call it. I'm not even going to get on. I'm not going with the narrative that it's a bioweapon. I'm going with the narrative that it's a poison, whatever the hell it is. I don't have any subscription to, like, I'm not following any public narrative about what it is. I know I would never want it in my body. And the idea that they're allowed to encourage women in gestation to be like under the
Yeah.
auspices of health, the idea that they're saying that they're helping them, it's, you're still, we're in a world surrounded by these utter eels in a bucket. They're the creepiest people ever. So the idea
Yeah.
of like, just, it's not past tense. I can't talk about it like I'm still
Mhm.
mad at them because of what they did 3 years ago, still going on this minute as we're speaking about it. And the fact that people like were assisting them in any way or just going along to get along or only wear it now for a little while. It's like, no, I'm not on your team. I would rather be like killed here in the street. I'd rather be banished into the woods than play nice with you people who are going along with, like you say, you know, the largest gang going. And people like, you know, all the, you see it in the American right, the, you know, the Christian right, particularly in the States, they back the blue. You know, I'm not Antifa. Of course I'm not Antifa. I'm not a complete psychopath, but at the same time, like, I'm not backing the blue. Are you kidding? Like, you know, these are,
Mhm.
you don't have to listen to Passio for very long before you realize the problem with our societies is order following robots. 100%. None of this would take place if people who
Yeah.
don't think about the consequences and the consciousness of their action don't make those steps to do it. Until that's like addressed, we are in a prison of these people. If you don't think for a moment that people who are arresting old ladies on park benches and getting people in parks and kicking them off of the green grass trying to get a breath of fresh air during the lockdowns aren't going to like put you on a bus and put you in a uniform and send you off to the Ukraine, you live in cloud fucking cuckoo land, you delusional prick. I have no nice with these
Mhm.
people, and you know, sorry to be vulgar on your show, but like I'm like
No.
sick to death of it, and it just
Yeah.
makes me ill that people think like to go along with any of these operatives, these agents and operatives, and act like that's going to get you better. You know, the whole like the whole concept of voting. You know, just that you anybody thinks Keir Starmer is going to come in and change the game on the field. Are you literally kidding? Like, you think that choosing Trump over top of Biden is going to make any odds in the entire thing? Just the idea that you think one shit sandwich is going to be better than the next shit sandwich, or that whole idea that you go, well, we just got to go along with all kinds of bad and then good comes out of it. People just have that like alchemy of their mind that's fooled them into thinking, well, I'll just, you know, I'll stick pins in my eyes for a few weeks, and then like it's exactly what we're talking about, the idea of like only 3 weeks to, you know, dampen the curve or whatever the hell their patter was. It's just like, I'm just going to stab myself in the face with a shovel for 40 minutes and hopefully tomorrow I'm going to feel a lot better about things. It's just madness. And it's why, you know, I think about it all the time, and I'm sure you do as well. Just that, like, is it part of our conditioning? We talked about whales earlier, how their mind works. You know, how is it that we can abide such madness? We seem like almost to have like this ability to partition where the things that we know are true and real don't apply to our everyday decisions or our future, you know, trajectory.
Mhm.
And it's just like, I don't say I'm removed from it. I know I'm compromised. I understand that. I have my own world of what's that horrible expression that we all have? A hypocrite. And I know I shopped at Tesco today. I'm not proud of it. I just like, but at the same time, I didn't get like a processed sandwich. We didn't talk about it much, but I've had like real medical difficulties of late, and basically since 2014, and being diagnosed with systemic osteoarthritis and getting a new hip, and having like I've got inoperable issues in my neck and numbness in my arms and my fingers, and but at the same time, like I've done a really good job of resurrecting myself, mainly through fasting, particularly dry fasting, so not eating or not drinking for long therapeutic periods, 2 5 day not eating, not drinking fasts with lots of like little adjustments in the middle. And for that reason, some people now come to me for like sort of after my tours most recently, and seeing the difference in my energies and my behaviors. People are approaching me, and one of the main things that I tell them, Simpa, is just like, again, I went to Tesco today, but I didn't get like a sandwich they made. I didn't buy their bread, like I got some tomatoes, I got an onion, I got some, Greek yogurt, but like never would I get like any of their processed foods. Never would I like even dream of getting, something that's put in a jar in a factory and sent to us. Cause like I literally, and I don't know if you're so far down the road of cynicism, but like again, the people that I'm interacting with online, I'm just really frank with them. Like, I know I sound crazy. I'm the craziest conspiracy theorist you've ever seen or known or heard about, but I honestly think whether it's through the air, whether it's through light, photons, however, particularly through our stomachs, our mouths, they're trying to kill us as much as they want us like through our bloodstreams. They want us dead by any means possible. And if you get into like, processed oils, particularly rape seeds and canola and all this garbage that they've told people is way better for them than butter, all that they're finding out now is how just utterly destructive that is for you, whether it's like atherosclerosis in your bloodstream, whether it's in your arteries, whether it's macular degeneration of your eyes. Like they are killing us with food is just on the spectrum of things that they're using to make us dead. And to think that you like just go into grocery stores and randomly grab stuff because you're a bit hungry on the day or in the moment is a I don't want to vilify by saying a fool's game, but it's a dangerous game. And I'm very more than I've ever been before aware of that. And again, I'm sure you've got things in your head that immediately you analogize it to the fight for like for medicine. And I'm so glad that you said that about medicine, because that was like early days in the 90s in Toronto when we were doing like legalization shows, not knowing that's what we didn't want at the time. But the main leverage that was being used back then, and again we spoke of it earlier, where like most of the activists that I knew from that era are now unfortunately past. They're just such spectacular people that I learned from and knew along the way. But their fight at that time, and what I learned from them as their like leverage of consciousness, was that they were saying, and this is where it turned the tide in Canada against the government. At the time it was the Chrétien liberal government, and they just said like, we're not asking this. All gone are the days of begging you for what is already ours. It's that whole like idea of inalienable rights. It's like you're born with these rights. These have nothing to do with the government in power or whoever's leading the party or any of that, or your neighbor or somebody who's bigger or tougher than you. That's all nonsense. You were born with these rights inside you. And they made it clear to the government in those days, at that era, mid 80s or mid 90s, they just said like, this is medicine. You're stopping people from receiving medicine. There are people right now in pain that could benefit from having their appetites inspired. They could benefit from having their pain deadened. They could benefit from their lives being psychologically more optimistic. Like you're taking pleasure and benefit away from people, while at the same time you're selling and making great barrels of money of taxes from alcohol and tobacco. Like that was the early argument. And they're just like, so we're done asking. We're not here cap in hand at all. You're selling known carcinogens and making money off of people you're victimizing with poison. We're asking for medicine. And if you don't give it to us, we're going to do it regardless. And that's when that was put to the government to like make a decision, shit or get off the pot. Is it legal or illegal? And you may know or remember from that era that it went in. That's when it went into the non-legal gray area. The what do they call that again? The like intra legal and then, people at that point just began behaving as though it was legal because, like you said earlier, they knew they'd win in court. They were knowledgeable enough to know that, like, when they were on their deathbed, only wanting their appetite enhanced by like something that could make them feel better in the day and kill some inflammation and take away some pain in that direction, cut down their opioid use. They knew that if the cops were, kicking down the door at that point, that they were going to lose on human rights grounds. And that was like the big, that was the big stage difference when they stopped asking and started telling. Just like, no, 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 this isn't your right to create pain in these people. These are people you want to vote for you. You claim we're in a democracy. You're trying to encourage these people to support your government, and yet you're punishing them, medicinally. And that was when it really it shifted, and it still makes me sick. I was in a hotel room in Manchester a couple of weeks ago, and just happened to be my buddy was there, so the TV was on. No offense, but there was one of those like British police camera action type of things. I don't even know what the hell it was called. It seemed like it was on all night. And it was up in your neck of the woods. It was around like the Northeast, like Durham type thing. And literally, I felt like I was in the States in the 80s or something. It was like in the early 90s when I lived in LA, and it was just like cops was on bad boys, bad boys. It was like that kind of thing. We're like, we found a bud. It was like cave people, but watching like cops in England in the modern day, literally getting I think you might have some marijuana on him, just like, wow. Are you like a troglodyte? Are you literally like, do you have the like intellect of a gnat? What the hell is going on? And they're wondering, they're chasing people through estates, and they're wondering why nobody's helping them. They're like, seem like they're incredulous to the fact that like, nobody's on their team. It's like, well, first of all, you're arresting old women on park benches for trying to get fresh air, and you don't interview like a royal who's like accused of pedophilia on this earth, and yet you won't like have a conversation with the dude to begin with. You're literally like what's the old that great that Mitchell, what's his name, Mitchell, the comedian, but
David Mitchell.
David Mitchell, yeah. Didn't he do that sketch with we're the baddies?
Oh yeah, the Nazis. Yeah, yeah. It's like, we're
like,
the baddies.
like, do you not get it? You not get it? Like, has the penny not dropped yet? Yes. You're the baddies.
So the weird thing is, some of them get it. So in our local area, I attended a meeting a few years ago, prior to all like the lockdowns and all of that, and it was councillors, police officers, local healthcare workers, heads of housing associations, and community groups, and they got together in a working man's club with an active bar. So there's alcohol, do you know what I mean? And all these professionals do the presentation and talk one by one, and there's like me and like three of the nosy elderly people that kind of went more for the warmth and to talk to people than anything else. And I listened to them all talk this shit, and I just stood up and I went, these are all full of shit. You don't have a clue, because all of them said that the reason they were there is suicide, because we have some woods nearby where in the past 15 years, maybe a bit longer, this anecdote, maybe the past 2 decades, that there's been about 9 or 10 kids found hanging in those woods. It's fucking to the point of the dog walkers will look out the windows and wait for another dog walker to go in the woods first, so they don't have to be the one to come across them. And they were saying our kids are dying because they're taking drugs, they smoke a bit of the weed, and then they end up killing themselves. And I stood up and I was mortified. And I was just like, what is wrong? You've got it all fucking wrong. Their lives suck. You people represent an enemy. These things represent an escape and connection, especially cannabis. A few of them are getting together, 15-year-olds like I did back in the day, behind the co-op. And you get somebody to go in at the time when we smoked backy, someone to go in and get cigarettes. So you get someone to go get that and get the skins. And then somebody would go off and get you a bit of hash. And then you get around in the threes, 2 people to like hold, you'd have wind cover, and you'd make this fucking thing. And it was a couple of fucking percent THC. Do you know what I mean? We
Oh,
got
so cute.
goofy and giddy
Oh,
and
so
whatever
cute.
else. Do you know what I mean? Yeah, literally. And we would like bugger off to somewhere out of the way to be out,
Yeah,
and nothing would happen. But we
yeah,
would joy and giggle and go home with our bellies hurting from laughter. Go home and eat well because we're growing boys. And again, this isn't me for fucking YouTube and everybody else. I am not condoning youth drug use. I'm just giving an anecdote of my history.
yeah,
But it's that mechanism of connection, that's what they seek to. The drugs are almost incidental. So the
yeah.
drug matches kind of what you need to
Ceremonial,
get rid of, what your trauma is.
ceremonial.
And yeah, and
Yeah,
as to whether the trauma is historic or ongoing and to the severity of it. And then as to whether it's compounding or more complex. There's so much more to it that they understand on this side, but then they pathologize the drug use. Whereas when these people drink, they go, "Oh, you're drinking because of these problems. I'm not going to make you stop drinking. We'll deal with these problems and you'll stop." Do you know what I mean? So they understand the mechanism, but when they put in other drugs. So like I said, the reason I have to hold my prescription now is my psychiatrist kicked me off service because of my drug seeking behavior. I was denied ADHD medication because of my drug history and that I would be abusing stimulants. I got very pissed off with her. This is getting a bit personal maybe, but I got very pissed off with her and said, "Look," pulled up my phone and I went, "I could get probably 14 drugs into this room by the end of this conversation. Do you really fucking think that I've been trying to get drugs from you?" Do you know what I mean? It was just this dismissal, this absolute. She'd even gone to the point of, before she left the service, she printed out a thing and very. This study says that actually the medication that I would be giving you in conjunction with cannabis means that it would be ineffective. So actually, it would be bad for me to prescribe this. And I was basically like cast aside. And then on my notes, because I constantly check my medical notes, it said, "Mr. Carter has refused medication and thus further treatment is not required."
wow.
It's the
Out of
bigotry.
spite,
This
out of
literally, yeah,
spite.
out of spite, and that's with me again being as intellectual as I am, as well read and versed as I am, and as happy to piss off these people in these systems. But then for the average person, they mention it. It wasn't until I think 6 years ago a doctor showed me on the NHS their system. They literally flipped the monitor around. I went, "Here, let me show you this," and it was a young doctor, a trainee doctor, a young GP in as the part of the rotation of the trust up here, and she spun the thing around and she went, "I can't record your cannabis use here, other than your prescription use, which automatically goes onto your records. If you tell me you said cannabis, I click this
You
button
don't.
here, and in the drop down it says cannabis abuse." There is no such coding. There's all these the 6 letter codes. I think it's 8 letter codes that describe all conditions or all information, and there is not a coding that says that you are positively gaining
Acceptable.
benefiting from your own medicinal consumption of a substance. All use that isn't justified by them is abuse. So yeah, I mean, I got
Wow.
lucky. I got lucky with that doctor because she closed investigations. Like they had me down as abusing opioids, which yeah, I had a problem with
Okay.
benzodiazepine about 20 years ago when I was a youngin. You know what I mean? Same with amphetamine, and they had it as if active things. They had like
Yeah.
alcohol problems, and I was like, I haven't drank in like 10 years. You can't. And
Yep.
so every time I walk into a room, the doctor goes, and that's what they judge me on. And I up until recently would have no lawful right to access that
Yep.
piece of paper.
Yep. Yeah, so grim. I can concur with that. I relate
Mm.
to that entirely. It's just, you get sullied and compartmentalized. And I've had in my own experience with painkillers, particularly, you think admitting to them that you self-medicate with cannabis is something. I basically was at the threshold where I was going to lose either my kidneys or my liver through paracetamol poisoning because of the level of opioid that I needed from my cocodamol, from my codeine. So I was basically like for a elongated period of time on the phone to the doctor saying like, look, I'm benefiting from the opioid, but I'm fearful of having more. I'm at my threshold. I'm still in pain. And I had to get through that as well. This is a funny thing as well. And the Brits have always been famous for this. It's one of the things and again, I have to give to Canada. This is a strange conversation that one of the first things I noticed when I moved here in 97, Simpa, was that like trying to get like your pain dealt with was pulling teeth here, literally, not to be, ironic, like, and I first noticed it with my flatmate at the time, again, like 98, 99. I came in, a grown man, like my flatmate at the time was crying, bawling, face down in the pillow, just bawling, like holding a pillow, like with fists, crying. And I was like, what the living hell is going on? And he's just like, my tooth, he said, and I'm like, what? Like, you need painkillers. Go to the dentist. And he just said, I've come from the dentist. Blew my mind, right? Like, I'm just like, what? Like, at this point, I'm from Canada at that point, Simpa. I'm not like British by any standards. I've not experienced the culture. I'm just like, why is a grown man crying? Your tooth hurts. Okay, go to the dentist. No, I've just come from the dentist. I'm like, well, why are you still crying? Because they wouldn't give me, the painkillers I need for, and I'm just like, what Frankenstein world am I living in here? Like literally, and I've snowboarded across Canada and across the world really, in over 30 years. And Canada is just one of those places, whether your leg is wrapped around your head or whether you think you have something in your eye or your thumb hurts or whatever it is. I give it to them. I don't like them on many different levels, but like they will immediately, before anything else happens, they'll arrest your pain for sure. Like that's like, I don't know if it's changed now in the interim that I haven't lived there. I don't know if it's gone more diabolical, but it was always the case that like just immediately they'll put as many needles in you as possible with as much, painkiller as is necessary to at least find out what happened, right? To find the story out from you. And the idea that I was suddenly around people who are really reticent to give away like any amount of painkiller, just so begrudging with, and so in my most recent issues, I've got like chronic neck pain because of arthritis progression. And I got to the point where like I'm dealing with a doctor on the phone about like hey, I'm at this threshold. If I take more, I'll probably die because the paracetamol is going to shut down my organs. I want the painkiller, but I don't want like the poison essentially. And they're just like, well, so I failed basically in that attempt. And then this is where I was reminded when you were talking about self-medicating that we don't have to discuss why, but I've got like pretty extensive first aid kits, again snowboarding internationally and over the years, and I've always like just sort of you collect things as you go, as I'm sure you do and some of your listeners, and so I realized that with my normal, which is already not normal, even to say that is like partly fooling myself, but my necessary threshold of painkillers that I'm fisting 3 times a day minimum to wake up in the morning and to get to sleep at night. This is prior to like fasting intervention. I then start to supplement with only morphine removed from paracetamol. So I've got my normal like cocodamol that I'm jamming, and then I'm putting in like the morphine, the 30 milligrams on its own as I go. And that I'm finding is like it's working. Like I'm able to function. I can now do dishes and like go for a walk without crying and the kind of normalcy of life, right? So I'm on the phone with trying to explain this to the doctor and just saying like all I want is something. I want more opioids because like as much as it shuts down my bum, it also takes the pain away, and I don't think the paracetamol is helping at all. And I've found that if I take a little bit of morphine with my normal cocodamol dosage, that I feel better. So I go through the whole spiel. Literally, I'm like 3 minutes, like you'd imagine the conversation is going by the way I speak here now. I'm like, I'm 4 minutes along in my rant, and just like when I take a moment to breathe, the doctor just like, you have morphine? Yeah. That's the only thing that she takes from that conversation is like, and I just like, we don't have to get into why I have morphine, but I need more of that. And so she finally puts me onto, some of your listeners may be familiar with Zoramorph, like a slow release, long release morphine, right? So I get on those. 30 milligrams. I'm popping those like Smarties every 10 minutes to try, like they're a 12-hour release, but I've got like probably 5 in them per day, just trying to like keep a lid on things. And so I call, of course, it's like a maybe 2 month down the road prescription renewal. It's like 3 weeks later and I'm on the phone again. I'm like, hey, I can see the end of this tunnel and I don't want to be in agony. Can we like up the dosage? Because like you've given me the 30 milligram ones. And she's like, she Yeah, and then she starts horse trading with me, Simpa. She's like, "Oh, what's the, they do that. Oh, is it out of 10? What's your pain threshold?" And
Mm,
I literally like, and I see so much of myself in you because I was just like, "Hey, hey, 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 like, no offense, we don't know each other, we're not friends, and nothing I'm saying is personal, but I am in no way getting into a conversation with you about how much pain you think I have to tolerate being in
mm,
at all. Like, if you think I just got to like go through life at a steady 7 or like 4.5 is just okay for you to like hang up this phone and go home to your family and enjoy life and play Yahtzee on the weekend or whatever you do and forget that my world exists, like, don't for a moment think that's what's going on. I don't want to be, now write this down if you need to, and if your computer's on, you can put it on my file, in any pain at
yeah.
all for any length of the day. So please up my dosage. And then, of course, like she capitulated to that. But then, of course, what did they do? They gave me, rather than the 30, which I wanted, in your head is never what happens, right? I thought that they'd give me like an extra box of 30s so that like 4 hours or 5 hours in, when I'm still in agony, I can have another one and I can regiment it, right? I can like, I can play it because you and I know like we're lifers, right? We've done a lot of stuff. So it's like I'm not abusing anything. I don't want to be like out of my mind. I don't want to not know where to find the front door. I don't want to be in
Mhm,
pain. That's all I'm like, suggesting here. So instead, the next thing they do is give me a box of 60s rather than the 30s.
mhm,
But you as well, and I'm sure some of your listeners know, now you're in a situation where, like, unless you actually break apart the caplet and
mm,
start to like break down the internals, now I have to decide when I wake up in the morning if I want to like jump off a cliff, right? Because
mhm,
like a 60 rather than a 30 makes a huge difference in terms of like the initial like adjustment to it. And I'm sure it might kill the pain, but at the same time it also means I can't find my shoes or put on my gloves if it's cold outside because I don't know what the hell's going on for like 40 minutes. So it's just like you literally get into that place of not being able to win. And the denouement of all, as I am in front of you right now, spinning my head around, I'm in like discomfort. I'm not, that's why I sit at odd angles as well. I'm not like, perfectly able to be symmetrical, but like through my own interventions, through like very dramatic, extended fasting, I've been able to like really revolutionize my life. And the like the punchline to this for me is that like I'm like off their radar now, Simpa.
mhm.
I don't, and they don't with me. But they're even inquired as to why this guy who was like literally browbeating them on the phone for a bag of opiates isn't calling them anymore. And like, in fact, today I set up my first appointment with a new doctor just to bring them up to speed with my situation. But like, it's going to be one of the first things that I address with them is just like, are you not even a tiny bit curious as to why I've not been in touch? Are you like, do I just, is there no individuality to, do you not like feather the
Mm.
patient relationship with you? Did you think I was dead, or did you think I was just like an opioid addict? Like what? Because I don't get it. Like you either don't check the file or don't care, and I'd like to know
It's
which it is.
I think it's 100% that they don't care, but
Okay.
not through malice. They
Yeah.
don't care through you walk out the door and they catch their breath and they quickly look at the next
Oh,
notes and something else appears in front of them and then the next
oh
and then
no.
the next. It's
Oh,
I
oh no.
I've seen so many doctors over the years. I was been through sort of mental health services and various other things since I was yeah fucking big, you know what I mean? And most of them, the vast majority of them, care, but it's behind this wall. You can see it, you catch it in their eyes sometimes, or in the way they'll speak to you. There'll be something where there's a slight elation in the voice, there's a slight humanity, and then it's drowned in the gobbledygook, or it's drowned in the rhetoric. And most of them learn to not tell you things. Like, I mean, I got quite lucky with a few doctors early on that would say what they had to say, and they understood that I was of a certain level of I guess camaraderie
Cognitive.
with them in a way that they
Oh, I
could
see.
yeah, that they could say like, well, this isn't the thing, but have you looked at, have you read, have you checked out? I got quite a few people that was the thing. They turn the monitor away, they turn, like, in an act of almost, this can't help you, but I as a person know these things. Do you know what I mean? I've been quite lucky with those interactions, but I think more so than ever, especially post Brexit, yourself as an immigrant, which is one of the questions I kind of wanted to ask you about, like, especially in the health service, like they obviously got bombarded out, and a lot of them just checked out and was like, fuck it, I can make so much money elsewhere. I'm an expat anywhere. I'm used to the idea of getting up and going elsewhere. I've got valuable skills and assets. I want to raise a family or do whatever else. Um, and yeah, so what's left in the NHS is, bless them, often not the best, the sharpest fucking tool in the toolbox, but still often quite a try hard one. They do still in so much way care, but like I said, the most of them look at 10, 20, 30 people in their books, whatever it is in a day, and they fucking come flying
Yeah,
through, and it's
yeah, totally. I
obviously
agree.
a lot of them have been captured, but I think the British system for all, because we did, isn't the direct doctor pay relation to the pharmaceutical industrial complex and other things like that. Like most of them will humor you with the conversation of whatever you bring up, but like you say, they'll do exactly what you say. They'll hone on the one or two things that they have a, air quotes, professional obligation to deal with. If you know what I
Totally.
mean? Like the number
Yeah.
of psychiatric appointments I would start with someone, and they go, also, anything you say is in confidence except blah blah blah. And I was like, well, then I can't really say anything. If you really say
Yeah.
that anything that puts me in danger, or says that I'm in imminent like, then how can I be honest with you? We're all in danger. I could walk out being hit by a bus tomorrow, lady. Like there's just this obfuscated part of that system, and that same oozy, fucking thick, oily bureaucracy. That's exactly what's happened with cannabis legalization, and it guaranteed it's going to happen with all these psychedelic compounds and everything else. It's infectious. It's like it's distilled. At first, it was a wave that blew out from Reaganomics and Thatcherism and deregulation and kind of took over the world. And then as it's boiled off, it's got, like I said, it's like sugar, thick, and it's just everything's like nothing can grow, nothing can breathe. We're stuck inside of this thing, and it's infecting fucking everything. And Britain, I think, we're at the forefront of this, and I think it's almost like a karma. The British are paying for what the Empire did. Do you know what I mean? For starting global slavery, for
Yeah,
starting all this, we're in a way. It all comes back to bite us in the arse. Even though it wasn't me that did it personally, it was obviously my
totally.
ancestors.
Yeah. But that's also part of the British experience that I so appreciate now and know better than I did before I came here, is that you don't associate yourself with the behavior of empire. And
Mm,
that's the conundrum that essentially the ruling class is facing now, is that they, I don't think, countenanced how the British public doesn't relate to their crimes
hmm
and in no way wants to contribute to them. And that was always something that was strange to a Canadian. I didn't realize sort of the diversity of thought that took place in the
mm,
UK before I came here. I thought that there was sort of a uniformity, but there's zero uniformity here, and it's saving grace in many ways. It also means that it's like an out of control bludgeon juggernaut that's now around the world trying to impose its aristocracy's opinion by barrel of a gun that nobody's willing to pull the trigger on or join to actually hold a gun to even think about pulling a trigger for. So in that way, it's kind of like it's an anomaly in that way in my experience as well, and it's something I've always really really appreciated about the UK is it's like it's heterogeneous.
mm,
It's of disparate parts. It doesn't work together. It doesn't want to be associated with its worst affectations, and it's great. I'm looking forward to watching the utter cascade of diarrhea that it's become to become more and more. That tidal wave that you spoke of earlier.
mm,
You're some of my friends who I get mad at because they don't like my posts, Simpa. They don't appreciate my public verbosity. They don't want to get on board my vitriol. They don't want to have particularly their careers associated with like psycho, Craig Campbell, the kamikaze pilot.
mm,
But at the same time, they will confide in me in private. They're like, it needs to get worse. It just has to get so much worse before people
mm,
actually pull their heads out of their asses and realize how bad it is. Because it is as bad as we think it, mentioned earlier, the fact that like we're going to be not able to travel outside of, the boundaries of the border without literally giving our firstborn and, having like essentially like a hostage to our data, to our we've danced around the head of a pin talking about the NHS all night, and just to not like, if anyone out there still has their bio data on that database, just like get it the hell away from them. They're not there to help you. They're not interested in that. As you say, and I'd like to repeat as well, that there are like, and I'm glad that you've had that experience within the system. There are humans in it for sure. I don't certainly want to come across as spiteful or ungrateful, particularly as somebody who like gave, most of my adult life to the thanks of like even letting me in. I don't want to be obsequious about it, but like the bureaucracy that I ran into to come to the UK and to be legally able to be here was the greatest bureaucracy of my life. It was, my grandmother's birth certificate, my mom's birth certificate, and my birth certificate. I didn't even finish my coffee in Ottawa in the embassy. And literally, like, halfway through a sip, they like, number 7 coming over, and just like, stamped my passport. Welcome to the world. Welcome, somebody like me who was bound, who had like the invisible wall of America. I could watch all their TV shows. I could see all the comedians down in America, but I wasn't allowed to go to like across the border into Washington and do a free spot on a karaoke night without getting arrested. And then suddenly I was given Europe. I'm talking earlier, I got to meet Mr. Nice in Meyerhofen. I got to come to, half of the population of the planet and be indefinite right of stay. That's phenomenal. I'm probably, I think about it all the time. I'm probably the only Calgarian in the world that met, first of all, when I look at Nice at Howard Marks in meeting him in Austria. I also met Eddie the Eagle twice in Austria. And I might have been perhaps the only living Calgarian, particularly not just Canadian, who also met Eddie the Eagle Edwards at the Olympics in Calgary in 1988 before his event. And I met him in a bar, and it was 1988. In 1989, the Calgary Flames won the Stanley Cup, the #1 trophy of hockey, national hockey, well, and the States included. And their star player and captain at the time was a guy named Joe Nieuwendyk, old Dutch stock. And he was doing shots with Eddie the Eagle, a ski jump contestant, before his event at the Olympics. And I met him when I said that, like, I'm reticent to get in like famous people's faces. I just said, like, hey, like I was 18 at the time, right? Like I was a very young man, Simpa. And I just said, like, hey, we love you, like, like all we know is that you're not like good at this. and that's enough for us. I don't know what you know about Canadians so far, but that's like, you're in. You're welcome to the group, and then to meet him twice in Austria, like that's what that's what the British Empire has given me. So I don't, I don't speak of the NHS from a like fuck everybody and fuck them and fuck fuck their dog and everyone in it. I do have like appreciation for what's been given to me, and maybe in other ways that makes me sad because I had so many presumptions of what I was going to run into, and so many of them have just kind of fallen through the ass of the bucket. The bucket's gone to the well, and it seems like the ass is now fallen out. Not that this conversation needs an ending, but that's a pretty seminal one, man. Rather than just trying to recite all we know of Marley doing war, that's pretty much it.
Pretty spot on. I'll actually, if you've got the time, like to ask you a couple of questions about comedy.
Yeah, sure.
Because there's a couple that I want to sort of ask. I suppose kind of speaking what we
can you hold that thought? Yeah. Do you have time?
Yeah. Oh, I've got time.
Okay.
I've got all the time.
Okay. So great. So attached to comedy, and you inspired me to like when you were talking about that when you suggested that you were like self-medicating, that they had to like put it in the books kind of thing, and that sort of incredulousness of like authority when we show any sort of like, you're a consultant essentially, you're nearly a professional, I'd imagine, of like the mental health system and
Mm.
of the like of drug prohibition laws, right? Like you're a confluence, you're a polyglot of like of overlapping expertises, and of course, in very humble presentation. So I can imagine there's many times that, when you're being pulled by a hoodie, that you can, as I have in my life, I'm that guy also, I'm like kind of unassuming. And every once in a while, like, authority gets a hold of you and you get a chance to like, I might look like an underdog right now, but like smile because you're on fucking camera, dude. Like,
Mm.
like this is
Yeah.
my one up. And I had one, and it's probably like easily one of the most memorable, exciting moments of my life. And it was regular for me. For years, I would go back and do a tour that I began with a guy you probably know, Ed Byrne, and Canadian comedian Glenn Wool. We
Mm.
we manifested this idea when we were in not in Meyerhofen, sorry, in Trois Vallées up in the French Alps, and we're doing comedy shows. Three British-based comedians, two Canadian, one Irish, are in Mirabel, and we're in this stinky fucking fondue joint doing our stand-up, and we're just like, it was probably Glenn and I more than anything, but the confluence of Ed sort of made it more manifested and real. We're just like, we're two Canadian comedians here in the French Alps entertaining British people in like a shut down restaurant. Why the hell haven't we taken this to like Canadian resorts? Why are we not doing Canadian stand-up shows for snowboarders and skiers in like the best resorts we know? So we set up that like basically bore what became the Snowed In comedy tour. So we tied it in with a guy. We needed like a Canadian anchor. So we got in touch with a dude over there to basically like, set it up essentially so
Mm.
that we would come and do this trap line of, it started like 10 or 13 shows, and it grew to like the last time I did it was like 35 shows over nearly 3 months in like the best resorts all across British Columbia and Alberta. And just like, and part of Vancouver, it's just amazing. It was a spectacular thing. But consequently, it meant that I like almost because I didn't care about I quit doing stand up on New Year's Eve's like 20 years ago. And I've been doing comedy for like, this is my 35th year. And
Mm.
like literally 5 years in, 10 years in, I realized that like New Year's Eve is amateur drinking night. It's the last place that I want to
Mm.
try and like get a narrative going or make anyone laugh, because they're blotto and half of them are, like stoned out of their heads. Like, I'd rather be right now. Why am I working? Like I always had an attitude towards it. So consequently, I'd fly back normally on New Year's Eve because the price of the ticket would be so reduced. Back to back to Vancouver almost every time out of Heathrow, and usually the flight would arrive at like 6 p.m. and there'd be I'd have like about a 2 hour window to get out of Vancouver Airport and get to my favorite sushi restaurant on Robson Street in Vancouver with all of my buddies who I hadn't seen literally since, like 8 months before when the tour ended last time, right? So it's like this
Mhm.
this constant thing. So I'm like kind of, I'm in Vancouver Airport. I got my snowboard bag, I got my other like, bag, and I'm waiting. And this is one of these things where you play into the system and then the system bites you in the ass. I'm sure the entire place now is entirely AI and robotic from like the
Mm.
bottom up, because it's Canada and they're so like, fucking dystopian on the norm anyway. But regardless, it was just when it was like you could still, and I don't know if you still can, but you could choose whether or not you wanted to go through immigration and customs through the machine
Mm.
or to a person, right?
Mhm.
Oh, and I'm one of those people. I'm like, I don't want to lose the cashiers at Tesco or Asda or wherever the hell you decide to shop. I wait. I'll wait 40 minutes. I'm normally not in that much of a rush, and I try and use my time judiciously, no matter what I'm doing. And I'll wait behind, people with a million bags of groceries just because I want to like make sure a cashier has a job tomorrow and the next day and forever. Forever. I'm that pushback. Asda has now gone 100% to automated checkouts. I don't shop at Asda now. That's my thing. You don't have to do that, but that's definitely my position. So there I am, Vancouver Airport. I got to make a decision. Do I want to go through the robot or a person? I still remember it, Simpa. I still remember thinking, no, I like, as much as I don't like these goons in polyester, I also don't want them to be unemployed. That's not good for me. It's not good for my kids. It's not good for society. They can change, but they can't change if they don't exist to start
Yeah.
with, right? So I bothered to go through like the human being. I wait the 10 minutes that it wouldn't have been if I was at the fucking robot thing. And I still remember it. You and I know it, and everyone out there knows it, whether you want to be like, judgmental or not, or whether you think this is bias. I felt, and you've had it a billion times in your life, you know your different archetypal presentation, how you're treated in British society, how you look, what shirt you're wearing, whatever your haircut is, your facial hair. Me, like this, long hair, snowboard bag. I get to the customs person, and Simpa, they had me naked and in handcuffs, fucking tied to the wall in their mind before I even said good morning to them, before I said good afternoon. And literally, I still remember the lady. I'm not going to get into the fundamentals of why I felt judged. And maybe it's my bias reversing back. I've had that feeling like she was, the teacher in Ferris Bueller's Day Off. She didn't like me at the gig as soon as she could focus on me. Regardless, she put the like W or the Y or the X or whatever their secret code was. Oh, Craigie in his snowboard bag and his long hair and his beard needs the extra checkaroo, right? So off I go. I'm now like in the queue. There's like 8 people lined up in the, in the zigzag fucking maze to get your bum checked, essentially on the metal tables. We've all seen them. You're in that area. And I'm just like, I'm waiting there for literally like, I'm full of coffee. I've been on a long flight from England. I've got like nothing but sushi and hanging out with my buddies and having my first Asahi in my head already. I've got the sake that I want on the wall. I'm already like drinking it. I'm like, what's going, and I just have that moment like we've all had where you're just like, what the hell is actually, what's going on here? And I realize what's going on there is nothing. Nothing. There's like 8, 10 people in front of me, and they're all just sitting there like normal people, either Canadians returning, hyper polite, or people who are first time in Canada thinking, well, they're nice people. This is going to be good, like whatever their thoughts are. Nobody looks agitated or bothered. And I'm just realizing like, whoa, I'm waiting here and there's no one on duty at all, right? I can see across. And then of course I spot behind the stainless steel tables are the blanked out mirror windows, right? So, and I don't, anybody here is watching, this is a bit of advice from an old dog. You want to get those pricks off of their donuts and out of their coffees. First thing you do, and I did it, got out the camera, got out the phone, and started videoing everybody. Started videoing the lineup, started videoing the area, started videoing the window, started like talking to myself about it. They came out of there like I'd kicked a wasp's nest, right? Like just fucking blasted out of there. It's like coffee, donut crumbs flying all over the place. They come up. One guy, of course, takes the lead on me. Said, "Sir, can you come through here?" So I now jump the queue out of nowhere, right? So I'm now like, can you open your bag and whatnot? And oh yeah, sorry. And first off, what do you think? Of course, you can't film in here, sir. Right away, right? Can't film. And I said, hey, that's fine. I've stopped filming, but it's not your right to take up hours of our life. I'm telling you that right now and for free, right? You can like put the little squiggle on our little piece of paper and send us to the different queue so that we like need secondary investigation, but it's not your right to finish your smoke or whatever the hell you're doing in there while people queue up on New Year's Eve waiting to go to see their loved ones in their lives, right? So and so the guy's just like, well, you're not allowed, normal fucking default. Oh, the rules are there, and I just thought, okay, that's fine. Then check me. What do you need? What do you want to know? And the guy, like, from that like little breakdown, he just said, this is one of my Simpa. This is just one of my favorite. Like, I wouldn't have had any attachment to Panto without living in the UK for as long as I had up to this point. Canadians wouldn't even have had an association with what Panto is. But like after that little, like we had that back and forth. And this is another thing, like people might seem that this is like me embellishing, but it's also, and something that I take, and I don't do it in the UK. I have a different relationship with authority here, but it is one of the things that I most cherish about my relationship. And you probably have it from growing up in like your own area. You know it so well, the rules, the laws, everything about it. One of the things I most hold dear is how I and many people I know in my life behave towards authority in Canada. Right? Like, I do not fear them at all in slightest. So if you think I'm like playing up how I was behaving, that is exactly how I was behaving. If anything, I was being more over the top than I've displayed right now to get that guy out of his room to now confront me. And we got to that like little, like stalemate, and just said like, do what you got to do. What's your thing? And he said, well, do you know why we're now speaking to each other? And I said, no, I can think of many different reasons, but that would probably get me arrested to say them out loud here. What, why have you bothered to annoy me on this fine evening, sir? And he said, well, I'll just be frank with you. Drugs. And Simpa, again, like I can't possibly overact. And bear in mind, like now, like, I'm about to start like a 40-date comedy snowboard tour at all the resorts of that province alone. And I'm in front of like a queue of tourists and semi-Canadians, for all I know, that are like watching this spectacle unfold. And I must have held on to my guts and screamed out loud with my back arched in fake laughter for 9 solid minutes. I can tell you, I was howling. I was not allowing myself to get a breath out of fake laughing in this guy's face. And by the time I could finally bring myself to inhale enough to get a conversation, I said, do you just like in fits, right? Just right in front of this guy crying now. Just do you do I'm smuggled from London, England, to Vancouver, Canada. I just like was literally on that, laying on the ground, rolling around like a maniac. And I just said, like, is it your first day on the job, sir? Like, once I composed myself, I was just like, do you actually believe? Do you have any idea how much any drug cost? Any drug, you name one tiny bit of contraband or prohibited item in London, England. Can you imagine what the margins would have to be for me to take the risk, looking like I do with a snowboard bag, to bring illegal drugs in a quantity necessary to make a profit, when I can actually, and at this point, like, and it's Vancouver Airport, I can see like through other windows, I can see outside, I can see Richmond, British Columbia beyond the like containment room we're in. And I'm like, what, name a drug? Because I can tell you that, like, I've lived in Vancouver. Within a 3-minute cab ride, I can get you what you need in the quantity that you need it. Not tomorrow, not next week, not to make a deal for next month. Today, now, right away. And then he came back at me. He said, and I'm sure you've had this in your own back and forth with the police. He said, you seem to know a lot about it. And I just said, I know everything about it. I make it my business to know everything about it. I can tell you every little stage of it all along the way. I know how many illegal operations take place. I know how much a pound of Canadian Northern Lights hydro trades for directly at the border with Washington State for Colombian cocaine. I can give you today's prices in every increment you can dream of. And he just said, at this point, I'd already told him, I said, and the other thing is, I'm a comedian, and I'm on stage for like the next 2 months. And unless you want to be referenced by your name tag and your specific name, Mr. Chen, I'd suggest that you get me to my sushi appointment like yesterday. And he took me to a side door that I didn't even know existed, Simpa, in the Vancouver like control area. And literally, like, on the way through, like, kicked the double doors open and just said, when's your show? I'll put you on the door, buddy. And that was like, for me, just one of the like, wowie, don't kid a kidder. Don't for a moment think that like I need to be, because I think like you do, Simp, I think how many guys How many kids, how many people half my age that look just like me? And I see them all the time. I especially saw them when I was snowboarding. Guys that literally looked like me in a Russian doll, different age, same beard, same long hair, same snow pants. And how many people like that over their careers have they treated like a dickhead? And finally, they pulled the wrong straw. They finally pulled the wrong guy in and tried to be, authoritarian towards somebody who knew way more the hell about it than they ever dreamt could possibly happen to them. And they literally dumped in their own pants and kicked me out a side door at the airport from the security zone. So, like,
Yeah.
that I take pride in that. It's why I would never behave that way in the UK in front of, I wouldn't even know where to start with like the kind of milieu of opaqueness of how things work here. But like Canada, I'm just like, I'm not taking this. There's no way. You don't get to do this. You like, you want to like ruin people's day or whatever your thing is. But if you're so out of your mind that you think that somebody would smuggle drugs from England to Canada, where literally it's the cheapest place on earth outside of maybe Brazil to get drugs, like you're just clueless. You shouldn't even be here. I'm embarrassed for you that you would even ask me. It's just wonderful. Sorry. So
Yeah.
comedy. So there I am.
Let me give you my quick rebuttal anecdote because I just got caught up by
Please.
Toronto airport
Oh,
security. So, as I was telling you before, when I flew to the States, I did 6 weeks in America, did about 6,000 miles in rented cars and hit various legal states. And then I flew back via Toronto purely because when I used to do live streams on Facebook, some to quite various varying degrees of success, but I quite international audience, random people here and there. And one of them was this guy that I got sort of met online in Toronto, and he was like, "Oh, dude, how you doing this trip, man? You should come by. Like, you come meet these farmers and that. We'll put you up for a bit. We'll look after you for a week." And I was like, "All right, sounds cool, sounds cool." So I've blown through most of my budget and everything else, and I had like this reserve money for what I needed for it. I'd budgeted out what I needed, so I got the car rental. I'd what I needed and a little bit more and a credit card. And I was like, worst comes to it, credit card comes out. Fuck the credit card. I hate the credit card, but if it came to it, and thank fuck that I did because I landed me and 4 Chinese nationals to a side door.
Whoa.
And as you said, it's the banality of it. There's next to no one around, but there's like 16 cameras, a bajillion blacked out bits of glass. The way everything like narrows into certain positions, and then the chairs and all the infrastructure is so just like what the fuck. And then they pulled me and they started going to my suitcase and like, so we just stopped you because like where you staying, where you going? I'm like, why do you need to inquire about that? I was like, I've submitted in the paperwork for my documentation that I'll be staying at this address for the first evening. That's all the law says that I have to submit to you. I'm like, well, we're just confused. But it was really like so benign. It wasn't aggressive. They were just like, oh, so what you doing? And I'm like, wait. And I had to
Let me
explain
interrupt, let me interrupt. Sorry. I always describe Canada, and you'll appreciate this for that. I call us fascism with a smile. Sorry to interrupt, but
Yeah,
that's what
no,
Canada is. They're just
that,
like, hi,
yeah.
how can we help you today? Well, they fist you. Sorry,
It's
go
yeah,
ahead.
no, 100% the friendliest fuck you I've ever had.
Yeah, totally.
And I may or may not have had a DMT cart left over in my case, so I was slightly nervous about that being discovered. But so they were going through it and they were like looking for cash and big things, and they were saying like, well, just your what was it, your previous flight designation in history, you've left LA, you've been out in America, why is it you were in this spot? And I didn't think about it, and I was like, oh, Canada's changing the law in like 3 months, it's going to be legal here. So I was like, oh, I actually went to speak at the world's largest hemp
Oh no.
yeah, I basically I went to this thing called Hemp Fest in Washington,
Oh.
and then I went down to Oregon, I went to Colorado, and I did this, and I was just like, just telling them about it, you know what I mean? And that like looking at me, like, what the fuck? And it was literally getting to about 10 o'clock at night at this point. The other Chinese nationals
Whoa.
had kind of gone. They'd been scrutinized, and basically they were looking for cash. I'm sure of it. They just basically went through looking for money, and then when they found out, they just
Wow.
kind of kicked them off, went to the next one.
Yeah.
And they're kind of looking at me, and then somebody else comes in, and they go off the chat, and there's a paper, and they're talking, and they were like, "So what happens if this?" Because had to explain how I met this guy, and I was like, "Well, basically, I
Wow.
do live streams because in my country I do X, Y, Z. And they're like, mm-mm. And this guy said I should come and see with and stop with him. And they're like, what if you, and it was childish as fuck, but it was like, what if you
Yeah.
fall out with him? And I was like, I'll stay in a hotel. I'm an adult. I've got my passport and money. And they're like, but what if this and what if this? And it was like, you're not my parents. It was just
Wow.
this so interfering sort of thing. And I was trying to equal the line of responding slow enough that I wasn't just being like, what?
Yeah.
And seeming that they wanted to go further into it,
Yeah.
but also actually responding to them to understand the situation because I couldn't get my head around it. I was like,
Yeah.
I've broken no law. I specifically double checked the night before in a hotel in LA when I left like because I did a lot of camping in the States. So I had like a Bowie knife and a
I
fucking
love
tent
that.
and loads of stuff. But no, I left it in the
Oh, okay,
hotel.
okay,
So
okay,
and I
okay.
left it with a note saying to Goodwill. And like you're saying
Wow.
about leaving drugs, I left
Like,
whatever bits of weed and edibles on the
yeah.
side for the cleaners. I was like, enjoy the edibles. Please donate this to Goodwill.
Oh, you're a good man.
I'm off. And, so it landed. And then, yeah,
Wonderful.
by the time they got us out, the car rental guy was gone. So they'd eventually just kind of gone, well, he can find what was it? You can financially support yourself. So therefore, yeah, you're free to go. And it was just kind of what?
Whoa.
And then I went down and I was like, there's no one at the desk. There's no one at the fucking, and luckily it was like, I think from 5 to 11, something like that. And the desk was
Yeah.
shutting at 11 for the cars. And if I couldn't have got that, I couldn't have got in contact with the other guy because I'd just landed in the
Whoa.
country, which was my SIM card, my US SIM card had died, and I
Yeah.
had to wait for my Canadian SIM card to kick in. So I was like contactless. Do you know what I mean? With these things, they'd held
Yeah.
me up long past
You'd
the
have just thought
window.
you'd stiffed him and wouldn't have been there. Yeah.
Yeah, so
Wow.
I got the car rental arranged. Thankfully, like the guy came in and was like, "All right, the paperwork's fine." And I got the last pick. You know what I mean? I got the last thing from the evening, and it wasn't too bad. It was just a bit short sedan-y thing, and I wanted something a bit bigger because the fucking Canadian roads are straight forever, and your cops are not the smartest on the road, it would seem. Um, allegedly, huge allegedly. Um, but yeah, and they then kind of released this, and it was the like I said, the banality of it. And then versus the only other time I really had an issue is I may or may not have flown back from Ireland to the UK one time, allegedly, for comedy's sake, YouTube, on LSD.
Ah,
And at the security got stopped and they scanned my bag, and I thought, what the fuck? And basically, I had a stack of flyers, like legalized drug flyers. I'd been out for a movie premiere in Dublin, for one of Clark French's movies, and been enjoying sort of the atmosphere, whatever else. Yeah, getting made sure I'd left all the fucking drugs except for allegedly, but for the
what,
sort of
right.
sake of this joke.
Yeah.
And yeah, I took it, and it's gone. It's come up with this, and this kid it was quite a late shift again to get on a Ryanair flight. He spun it around. And went, oh, it's this thing here. I was like, and it's an organic object. And I went, no, it's not. He opened it. It was like all these flyers. He's like, oh, this is interesting. What's this for? And I'm on fucking acid, like, and chatting about him. He's like, so what are you looking for? He's like, oh, I've got to now do the wand. And she pulls out a wand. I'm like, what's that for? He's like, oh, it's for explosives and for drugs and and I'm like, oh, that's interesting. That's interesting. And literally just like start coming up more and more as I go through. And the Ryanair flight was like 55 minutes of hell. First time I'd ever flown like fucking Ryan. Actually, no, the second time because I'd flown out on Ryanair, but
Oh, I see.
didn't notice they play continuous adverts.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
through the fucking over the thing.
So it wasn't the acid, it was Ryanair.
No, it was definitely Ryanair. I've subsequently checked, and I've been sober on a Ryanair flight, and that is what they do. And yeah, and they're trying to sell you shit constantly. And I was
Yeah.
literally, as once I didn't realize at that altitude, there's something happens because LSD affects like the hypothalamus and like temperature regulation and all other kinds of parts of the cognition, and
Yeah.
something with the altitude and the pressure. And it was just like a different level. And I'm quite, well versed in these things, but it was just such a like the fuck? And then luckily go back into the UK, Newcastle, bless Newcastle fucking airport. I don't even think there's a desk in there for customs anymore. You just land on it, fuck off, fuck off, fuck
I
off.
know. What
Ah,
did you like?
yeah, fucking fun times, fun times. Yeah, like,
I've flown a few times on acid also. I know what you're talking about. And I've
it's
always, it's funny, the most like capable drug people that I ever grew up knowing, like early paternal relationships with people that advised like a few kind of the tenets of drug use, always said, don't ever, ever fly on hallucinogens. Don't fly on acid. Don't fly on mushrooms. Don't. And I've like, to this day, it's never bitten me in the ass, Simpa. I've bucked the trend. I've always very much enjoyed it. Certainly makes the flight go by more, less banal, as you mentioned. There's never a dull moment, that's for sure. The last
100%.
time I microdosed on a Ryanair flight, and it luckily kind of peaked in the boarding in the lounge area. Thankfully, I'd been told that microdosing kind of sits at a sub hallucinogenic level, they say. But I definitely I had some movement. I thought, oh great, I'm the guy, just like I'm just doing this so I felt a bit better about my Tuesday, and now I'm gonna be, you start to see yourself in a straitjacket in seconds, don't you? It's just I quite enjoyed that experience, though, of course.
It would be so interesting. Maybe, I don't know, I have an audience all over the place. This could maybe happen. If you work for KLM particularly, and you fly the Amsterdam back to anywhere in the fucking UK, I want to talk to you, because the shit you will have seen. Because I've flown, allegedly, again, for humor's sake, potentially, bought truffles over there in a legal jurisdiction. If it happens to fall in like an M&M's packet or something like that, and you're eating it as you go through customs, no one's going to bat a fucking eyelid. This is not to be construed as legal advice, but then you can obviously have quite a fun interaction. And again, I wouldn't advise for first timers, obviously. Do you know what I mean? Putting yourself in a tin can of fart at fucking a couple hundred miles an hour. Yeah, it's the same thing with the pink elephant. When you're on the plane and you may have taken one of those things, just don't think that it can come down. Do you know what I mean? It's going to come down at the end of the flight. But it's one of those things that you can't get over. I mean, I had a weird fear of flying when I was younger. Of just, I couldn't trust the idea of there not being a floor, because I'm on the floor. Like my feet, like when I was like a lot younger, like my feet are on the floor on the plane, but the plane leaves the floor. So but I'm on the floor. Like, do you know what I mean? I'd never quite got over that until probably one of these times on drugs where it's like, no, the floor is down there.
Oh, it's relative. I have a relative. There's two floors.
That's going to be the future of like psychedelic therapies. It's going to be like Mile High Club, but it's going to be of people having like therapy sessions, because they'll find like, yeah, actually, if you take 150 milligrams of MDMA and you fly at 25,000 feet for 22 hours, this resets PTSD.
Perfect. Yeah, absolutely. It's the sweet spot.
I can see there being funding for that, 100%.
Well, and that's such a hideous thing, Simpa, about like our entire experience. Like everything you're talking about reminds me, I spoke about this the other day with a friend who had, I think, a misconception about it. But we were talking about, and you probably run into this before, where you're talking with like drug experience. For me, it was like a group of like Dutch dudes who are at least as versed as I was, particularly in hallucinogens. And the suggestion, some people say that like if you're tripping too hard, have orange juice. Other people say have milk. But I challenge anybody who's watching right now to try and actually get legitimate information on any prohibited drug, because it's just like you're talking about trying to get like actual clinical testing or verifiable scientific information regarding it is an utter fool's game. And like there's different echelons of it as well. The other like hugely opaque area is what dogs can detect. Try as you might, try and find out as a civilian what dogs are actually able to differentiate against, and what, how many drugs they're able to be addicted to, or essentially differentiate between. All of these are like, this is the problem with prohibition, that it makes like even treatment of these things completely a brick wall of like non-information. Because like I know, as I'm sure you do, I know doctors in Ottawa, in fact, in Canada, and they've told me right out, or outright, they say like if someone comes into their emergency room and they're like blotto, if they're screwed up on anything, whether it's drink, drugs, or whatever it is, or they don't know what it is, they don't like do anything. There's no like a treatment protocol regarding it. They just leave them in a corner and wait until they sober up and then deal with them. They don't like intervene. They don't give them milk or orange juice or anything to try and like mitigate it. They just like immediately like get their hands away, but they don't even want to be involved in it until they're literally like, till their eyes come back together and their pupils come back. And, then they'll ask them where they were and what they did. But up until then, there's like no intervention. And that's like, again, it's just because of illegality that they've just put it into this place of, it's like, it's marginalized and it's dangerous. for that reason. It's utterly like,
Yeah.
they're not in a therapeutic mind regarding interacting with it. And that's another tragedy of it. It's just like we should be able to know, how these things are, at what dosage, how they make you react. There's so few, other than like Freud's work with cocaine, there's very little like
Extensive
background
work with
information.
cocaine,
Yeah,
it would seem.
yeah. Like when his daughter wasn't around, or his cousin, or yeah, sorry.
No, it's good. It's all good, all good.
I don't have to apologize on this podcast. Hopefully, sorry. My
No, not
my
at
comment.
all.
My,
No,
there's
what I'm thinking here, Craig, if that's all right. We've probably got about 3 hours of podcast up in here already. I think we've ended up covering sort of drugs, Canada, sort of your history and mine quite well. I would like to offer to bring you back on again in a few weeks, probably actually going to be March time around then if you got some time to do another recording for another episode, and we'll focus a bit more on the comedy aspects of things. If you would be willing to come
I'd be
back on, because I've
thrilled.
thoroughly enjoyed our time.
I'd be absolutely over the moon. I'd be thrilled. I'm so flattered that you'd even consider that. I'd absolutely love that. Yeah, and I look forward to it already. So
Awesome.
perfect.
Awesome. Yeah, it's just yes, time is going. I've run out of basically all of my supplies at the desk right now, and I'm desperate for a piss. So I think yeah,
What?
let's wrap this one up. We'll speak offline and yeah,
Awesome.
figure out a date and whatnot. I'm gonna let you go now and get on with your evening. I'm gonna record a quick bit of housekeeping, and
That's
speak to these fine folks at home. And
nice.
yeah, let's get another one in the diary soon, man.
Amazing. Absolute pleasure. Thanks, Simpa.
All right, I've enjoyed it. Peace and love, brother. Take it easy. Peace. Bye.
Likewise.
Well, there you go, folks. That was Craig Campbell. I thoroughly enjoyed that. I had some laughs. I learned some stuff. Had some quite insightful conversations there. I think we covered quite an exceptional sort of amuse-bouche of topics, and we delved in deep into quite a few. Yeah, good to exchange some sort of anecdotes about our experience with Canadian Border Force. And yeah, for all it didn't kind of go in the direction that I was expecting. Not that that's a good or a bad thing that I'm saying. It wasn't a bad thing at all. Yeah, I think looking forward to getting him back on in the not too distant future. Probably after Spanibus at this point, because we do have some nice guests lined up for you fine folks over the next few weeks as I continue to diversify the Simpa Life with the kind of clientele that we get on the podcast and the conversations that we have. And yeah, as I continue to sort of push the growth of the platform with daily clips, shorts, and like I said, more content. So yeah, greatly appreciate everybody that is liking, sharing, interacting with anything that I'm posting at the minute. Greatly appreciate it. It is inspiring and is yeah, fueling me on to continue to grow the platform, which allows me to get access to more diverse and better guests. Not better guests. I don't want to put a value judgment, a hierarchical structure upon my guests. What I mean by that is reach out to people that otherwise I guess I wouldn't have the opportunity to speak to. Yeah, so appreciate it. Greatly appreciate it, folks. All right, I'm not going to waffle on much longer because I have kept you quite a long time in class today, folks. Yeah, be good to each other. Have a great week. We'll see you next week. And yeah, check us out on all social media platforms at the Simpa Life. Check out patreon.com/Simpa Life if you want to support us a little bit extra with some dollar bills. For less than a cup of coffee a week, you can help me keep the lights on in this project and become a exclusive patron. And for the right price, get exclusive access to these podcasts early. All right, yeah, check out simpalife.com for more exclusive content. Yeah, we'll be back next week with somebody. It'll be awesome. You'll love it. It'll be great. All right, peace and love, folks. Yo, how's it going, folks? Welcome to episode 134. Fuck.